The wind had a name in this place. It was not a gentle breeze from the east, the kind Eleanor Hayes remembered from her childhood, the kind that promised rain and cooled the skin. This wind, in the Arizona territory, was a presence. It was a sculptor, carving the red rock into hoodoos that looked like forgotten gods. It was a thief, stealing the moisture from a man's lips and the hope from his heart. And it was a storyteller, whispering of droughts and spirits and blood spilled on the sand. It was 1883, or perhaps already 1884. Time moved differently here, measured not by calendars but by the height of the corn and the desperation in a man's eyes. Nora Hayes, known to most as just Nora, stood before a flapping canvas sheet that served as the fourth wall of her school. The school was a generous term. It was a lean-to, cobbled together from scavenged lumber and hope, baking under a relentless sun not far from the gaping mouth of Canyon de Chelly. The trading post at Tuba City was a long ride away, but it was the closest thing to what she had once called civilization. Inside this patch of shade, 23 children sat on packed earth. They were a mix that would have given a Boston society matron an attack of the vapors. There were the pale, freckled faces of settler children, their clothes patched with flour sacks. And there were the Dine children, their black hair shining, their expressions watchful, wearing the vibrant velvets and silver traded from their families. Nora pointed with a stick of charcoal to a slate. 4 + 3, she said, her voice clear and carrying, refusing to be snatched by the wind. 4 apples, and you find 3 more. How many apples? Thomas. A small, sun-baked boy squinted. 7, ma'am. 7, she repeated, a small smile touching her lips. She turned to a Dine girl in the front row. And how do we say 7? Little Fawn. The girl, whose real name was a song Nora was still learning to hear, said the Dine word softly. Good, very good. This was her life, a daily battle against the elements and ignorance. Nora Hayes was a woman in her late 20s, though the desert sun was trying to etch 35 onto her face. She was tall for a woman, with a spine made of Pennsylvania steel and hair the color of autumn leaves, pulled back so tightly it seemed to tug at the corners of her intelligent, weary eyes. She was an orphan, a woman of modest means and no husband, and in the East. That had made her a subject of pity. Out here, it just made her independent. She wanted more than this lean-to. She dreamed of lumber, real windows, a floor that was not just dirt. She dreamed of a small room in the back, a clinic with carbolic acid and clean bandages, and perhaps, if she dared to dream truly big, a real doctor who would come once a month. She believed in this place, in this community of mixed blood and hard futures. She believed they could build something better than what they had all left behind. Miles away, at the Tuba City trading post, Ash Nez was not thinking of the future. He was anchored firmly in the present, which was the only way to keep the past from drowning him. The present was the smell of wool, raw and oily, piled in the dusty yard. It was the weight of a cured deer hide he slung over his shoulder. It was the feel of his horses, a small, tough band of mustangs, their muscles moving under his hands as he checked their hooves. Ash was a man made of the desert. He was Dine, born of the Bitterwater clan, born for the towering House clan. He moved with a silence that unsettled the white men at the post. He was not tall, but he was broad in the shoulder, his body possessing a lean, ropey strength. His face was a map of sun and thought, and his eyes, when he chose to lift them, were as black and deep as a canyon at midnight. He had been a scout. He had been a warrior, protecting his people's flocks and families. Now, he was just a man trying to live. He lived by the principles of Hozo, a word the white men could not pronounce and would never understand. It was not peace. It was not happiness. It was balance. It was walking in beauty, in harmony with the earth, the sky, the wind, and the self. It was a state that felt impossibly far away. He finished his trade with the post owner, exchanging his hides for flour, coffee, and cartridges. He took no whiskey. He spoke little, his English precise and clipped. He watched the new settlers, the ones with soft hands and loud voices, and his heart remained a cold, hard stone in his chest. He remembered the long walk. It was not a memory, like remembering a meal. It was a brand on his soul. He had been a boy, but he remembered the soldiers, the blue coats. He remembered the snow, the hunger, the wailing of the women as the children fell. He remembered Fort Sumner, the sickness, the alkaline water that killed the sheep and poisoned the people. He remembered his own sister, snatched away in the chaos, her face a blur he chased in his nightmares. They had been allowed to return, but the world was broken. The harmony was gone. He did not trust the Bilagana, the white people. They came with papers and promises, and behind them came the railroads and the rifles and the sickness. This woman, this teacher he had heard whispers of, she was just another one. She brought books, but the books were just another way to erase what it meant to be Dinin. He gathered the reins of his horses, ready to head back toward the high ridges, back to the silence of the rock. The two worlds collided over a shard of rusted metal. It happened near the school. A small dine girl, no more than 6 years old, had been playing in the junk heap left by a passing freight wagon. She had stumbled, and her small hand had come down on a jagged edge of a discarded tin can. The scream cut through the drone of Nora's lesson. Nora was outside in an instant. She saw the girl, Nijoni, clutching her hand, blood welling bright and terrible between her small fingers. The other children froze, a silent, staring circle. Nora ran, her skirts kicking up dust. "Let me see, honey, let me see," she murmured, kneeling in the dirt. The girl was crying, sharp gasps of terror and pain. Nora gently took the small wrist. The cut was deep, slicing across the palm. It was bleeding badly, and it was filthy. "It is all right. We will clean it," Nora said, her voice dropping into a calm, reassuring tone she used for frightened animals and terrified children. She looked up. "Thomas, run to my trunk. Inside the lid, there is a small tin box and a bottle of water. Run." As the boy scrambled off, a shadow fell over her. Ash Nez had been riding past, on the high trail, when he heard the cry. He had seen the teacher woman run. He guided his horse down the embankment, his movements fluid, and dismounted before the animal had even fully stopped. He stood over them, his presence an immediate weight. The other dying children visibly relaxed, their fear lessening in his shadow. He was one of them. Nora looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. She saw a Navajo man she did not know, his face impassive, his eyes hard. He looked at the girl, then at Nora's hand, which was now covered in the child's blood. Ash said nothing to Nora. He knelt, his knees cracking, and spoke to the girl in the soft, flowing sounds of the Dine language. His voice was not the clipped English of the trading post. It was a river, deep and certain. The girl's sobs quieted to whimpers. She trusted him. Thomas returned, panting, holding the tin box and the canteen. Ash's eyes flicked to the box. He recognized the smell of carbolic soap. He had seen the army surgeons use it. It stung. Nora opened the canteen. "This is clean water," she said, looking directly at Ash. Not as a challenge, but as a statement of fact. "It needs to be washed." Ash held her gaze. He expected her to push him aside, to take charge with the brittle superiority of her race. He expected her to pour the stinging soap onto the wound and hold the child down. Instead, Nora poured a little water onto a strip of clean linen from her box. "Will you tell her," she asked him, her voice quiet, "that this will clean the dirt? Tell her I will be as gentle as I can. Tell her she is brave." Ash stared at her for a long second. He had not expected to be asked. He had not expected this quiet respect. He translated. The girl, Nijoni, nodded, her dark eyes fixed on Nora's face. Nora worked quickly. Her hands were deft. She cleaned the wound, her touch firm but astonishingly gentle, wiping away the grit and blood. The girl flinched but did not pull away. Ash kept speaking to her, a low murmur about a brave mouse and a clever coyote. The bleeding slowed, but the cut was wide. It would need stitches, and she had no needle fine enough. She needed to bandage it, and tightly. She looked in her tin. Her linen was almost gone. Without pausing, Nora reached for the hem of her own petticoat. It was her last good one. Brought all the way from Pennsylvania, it had a simple, blue calico ruffle. She tore a long, clean strip from it. The sound of ripping cotton was loud in the sudden silence. Ash watched her. He watched her sacrifice a piece of her own clothing. A good piece. For a child who was not hers. A child of the people who had every reason to hate hers. Nora folded the blue cloth into a thick pad and placed it on the wound. She tore another strip to bind the hand. Her movements economical and precise. She wrapped the palm, securing the pad. Her brow furrowed in concentration. When she was done, the small, brown hand was wrapped in a bright blue bandage. "There," Nora said, forcing a smile for the girl. "You see all better." She helped the child to her feet. The girl's mother was running toward them now from a nearby hogan, her face a mask of fear. Ash rose, his body moving like a panther's. He spoke to the mother, his voice calm, explaining what had happened, what the white woman had done. He pointed to the clean water, the soap. He did not say the woman was good. He said the woman was clean and had not hurt the child. The mother gathered her daughter, her eyes darting from Nora to Ash. She nodded once, a sharp, grateful gesture, and hurried her daughter away. Nora stood up, wiping her bloody hands on her already stained apron. She felt suddenly exhausted. She looked at the Navajo man. "Thank you," she said, "for your help, for speaking to her." Ash looked at the blood on her apron. He looked at the torn hem of her petticoat peeking from beneath her skirt. Then he looked at her face. He saw no pity there. He saw determination. It was a dangerous thing. "The dirt here carries sickness," he said, his first words to her. "You should clean your own hands." He turned, swung himself onto his horse's bare back, and was gone, riding back up the embankment without a backward glance. The dust from his horse's hooves settled on her shoulders. Nora stood alone, watching him go until he was just a small shape against the red rock. That night, Nora could not sleep. The wind flapped the canvas of her school and rattled the door of her small cabin. She thought of the girl's hand, and it fed her resolve. She sat at her small, rickety table, a single candle guttering. She would write to the missionary board again. She would not beg, she would demand. These children deserved more. They deserved a wooden floor and glass windows. They deserved a clinic. She would build it herself if she had to, brick by mud brick. This community, this fragile mix of peoples, was worth fighting for. It was the only future she could see, miles away. Ash sat by a small fire high on the mesa. The horses were quiet. The stars were so bright they looked like holes punched in the sky. He was not looking at the stars. He was looking into the flames, and he was seeing the past. He saw that strip of blue cloth. Blue, the color of the South, the color of the sky, the color of turquoise, a sacred color, and he had seen it on the hand of a dying child, put there by a white woman. The gesture had unsettled him. It had cracked the hard shell of his certainty. He had built his life on the truth that the Bilagana only took land, they took sheep, they took children. This one, she had given a piece of her own clothing. The memory of the long walk rose in him, choking him like alkali dust. He saw his mother's face, thin and starved. He saw the bodies left in the snow. He saw the empty place where his sister, little one, had been. He had sworn then to keep his heart closed, to protect what was left of his people, to never trust the white man's world again. This teacher, with her gentle hands and her torn petticoat. She was a threat to that promise. She was a threat to the wall he had built inside himself. She brought schools, but the schools taught white words and white ways, and he had seen how that hollowed out the young men, made them strangers to their own clans. A deep distrust, cold and familiar, settled back over him. She was just one woman, but she was the gentle rain that seeps into the rock before the frost comes to split it wide open. His thoughts were interrupted by a sound. It was not the wind. It was the low voice of Hastin, one of the elders from a nearby clan, who had approached his fire in silence. The old man was thin, his face a beautiful, intricate map of his long life. Ash offered him coffee. The old man accepted, and they sat in silence for a long time, which is the way of true conversation. Finally, the old man spoke, his voice like stones rolling in a dry wash. "The wind carries new smells," Hastin said, staring at the same flames that held Ash's attention. "Not just rain, it smells of iron and black smoke from the east." Ash nodded. He had heard the talk at the post. "Crowley," Ash said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Silas Crowley, a name that was traveling across the territory like a sickness. A man with a deep voice and an empty heart, who saw the land not as a mother but as a thing to be broken and sold. There were rumors of a railroad spur, driving south, rumors of a copper mine, a great, open sore he planned to dig into the sacred Chuska Mountains. And to dig his mine and run his railroad, he would need water. He would need land that was guaranteed to the dying by the white man's own papers. "They are looking at the canyons," Ash said, his voice flat. "They are looking at the places where the water always runs." The old man sipped his coffee. He looked up at the sky. "The spring floods will be high this year," he said, seemingly changing the subject, but Ash knew he was not. "The water will come down from the mountains. It will wash away the old trails." He paused, his eyes finding ashes in the firelight. "The spring flood," the old man said, "will bring a choice. The water brings life, but it also brings what is hidden. It will force us all to choose what we mean to save." Ash said nothing. He watched the old man rise and disappear into the darkness. As silently as he had come, the wind picked up, howling now, and it seemed to whisper a name, Crowley, and it seemed to whisper of a choice, tangled up in the image of a small, brown hand wrapped in a scrap of bright blue cloth. It took 3 weeks for the supplies to arrive from the east, and another 2 days for Nora to secure a wagon and a driver willing to make the trip out to the canyon. The man, Ebb, was old and taciturn, with a face like dried leather, but his mules were strong and he seemed unafraid of the route. Nora had used the last of her funds from the missionary board, and a little of her own, to buy lumber for a real floor, a small pot-bellied stove, 24 slates, and a heavy wooden box filled with the medical supplies she craved: bandages, carbolic soap, sutures, and quinine. They were in the last stretch, a narrow pass where the red cliffs rose on either side, funneling the persistent wind into a moaning, dust-filled howl. The wagon wheels groaned in the deep ruts. "Almost there, ma'am," Ebb grunted, his eyes on the trail. "Should make the school by sundown." Nora, sitting beside him on the hard bench, clutched her bonnet. She was just about to reply when Ebb pulled hard on the reins. "Whoa, whoa, now." The mules stopped, their ears flicking. Ahead of them, blocking the narrow pass, were 4 riders. They were not painted for war. They were white men, dressed in dusty trail clothes, their faces obscured by grime and neckerchiefs pulled high. But the rifles they held, resting easy in the crooks of their arms, were not for hunting rabbits. One man, broader than the others, rode forward. His horse was a mean-looking bay. He stopped 10 feet from the mules. "That's far enough, old man," the rider said. His voice was a gravelly rumble. "We are just passing," Nora said, her own voice betraying a tremor she despised. "We have school supplies." The man laughed, a short, ugly sound. School supplies. We'll just see about that. He gestured with his rifle. This is a toll road, ma'am, and the toll is high. We have no money, Nora said, her hand instinctively going to the small reticule at her waist. I am not talking about money. The man dismounted, and the other three fanned out, their movements practiced. Mr. Crowley does not like complications, and you, teacher, are a complication. So, this was it. Nora had heard the whispers. This was not a robbery, this was a message. Get down, the man ordered Ebb. When the old driver hesitated, the man yanked him from the seat. Ebb fell hard into the dust, the breath knocked out of him. Now you, ma'am. Nora climbed down, her legs shaking, but she kept her spine straight. She would not give them the satisfaction of her terror. What is it you want? She asked. For you to go back east. The leader sneered. He walked to the back of the wagon and looked at the supplies. This is good lumber. A shame to waste it. He lifted his rifle and used the butt to smash one of the slates. The crack was sharp and final. No, Nora cried, lunging forward. Another of the men grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in like talons. You stay put. The leader raised his rifle again, aiming for the medical box. This land does not need your books. He spat. A sound, high and sharp, split the air. It was not a gunshot. It was a whistle, like a hawk diving. It echoed, seeming to come from the cliffs above them, first from the left, then from the right. The men froze. What was that? One of them whispered. Just the wind. The leader growled, but he looked up, his eyes scanning the rim rock. Then came the shot. It was a boom that slammed against the canyon walls, magnified into thunder. It did not sound like it was aimed at them. It sounded like it was aimed at the rocks above them. A spray of red dust and pebbles showered down, stinging their shoulders. Ambush! One of the men yelled, diving behind the wagon. The leader's horse, spooked by the shot and the falling rock, reared high, screaming. It tore the reins from his hand and bolted back down the pass. My horse! The leader roared. Another sound came, a different one, a low, powerful humming, like a great swarm of bees. Ashnez had used his knife to slice the rope holding a dead, dry yucca stalk to the canyon wall. It slid, then fell, tumbling into the pass behind the remaining 3 horses, cutting off their retreat. The animals panicked, bucking and pulling at their reins. We are boxed in. The men were confused, their bravado shattered. They were looking up, expecting death from the cliffs. They did not see the shadow detach itself from the rocks near the ground. Ash moved with a silence that was unnatural. He had no rifle. He had his knife and the stones of the earth. He came up behind the man holding Nora. Ash did not use the knife's edge. He used the heavy pommel, striking the man precisely at the base of his skull. The man crumpled without a sound, his grip on Nora loosening. Nora stumbled back, gasping. The leader saw him. It is just one damn Indian. He raised his rifle. Ash did not run. He bent, his hand a blur, and threw a flat, heavy stone. He had thrown stones like this since he was a boy, hunting lizards. The stone spun, striking the rifle barrel with a loud clang. The impact numbed the leader's hands and sent the rifle flying. Before the man could draw his pistol, Ash was on him. He was not a brawler. He was a warrior. He moved inside the man's reach, his shoulder driving into the man's chest. They both went down in the red dust. Ash's knife was at the man's throat. The other 2 men had their pistols out, but they were terrified. Their horses were gone. Their leader was down, and the cliffs seemed alive. Ash spoke, his voice low and cold, never taking his eyes off the man beneath him. Get him and ride. He pointed with his chin to the man he had knocked unconscious. The 2 men scrambled, grabbing their senseless companion and half dragging, half carrying him down the pass on foot. The leader, his face pale with rage and fear, was allowed to stand. Ash retrieved the man's rifle and tossed it far into the scrub brush. He kept the knife steady. "Go," Ash said. The leader locked eyes with him. "Crowley will hear about this. He will hunt you down, you red bastard." Ash said nothing. His silence was more terrifying than any threat. The man spat in the dust, turned, and ran, stumbling after his companions. Silence returned to the canyon, broken only by the wind and the nervous stamping of the mules. Nora leaned against the wagon wheel, her heart hammering against her ribs. Ebb, the old driver, was sitting up, rubbing his shoulder and cursing in a low monotone. Ashnez rose from the dust. He looked at Nora. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes were on her, checking for injury. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was the same clipped English from the trading post. "No," Nora whispered. "He did not. No, I am not hurt. You were watching." It was not a question. "I saw your wagon. This is not a safe road." He turned and began inspecting the mules, his hands running over their legs, calming them with his touch. "They smashed the slates," Nora said, her voice breaking with anger and frustration. She went to the back of the wagon. The ground was littered with broken gray stone. Her lumber was tossed about. One crate, a smaller one donated by a Boston church, had been split open. Books and papers were scattered in the dust. "This is all I had," she said, kneeling, tears of rage blurring her vision. Ash finished with the mules and came to her. He knelt, not to comfort her, but to help. He began gathering the books. A Bible, a copy of Pilgrim's Progress, a tattered book of poetry. As he reached for a small, rolled tube of oilcloth, his hand stopped. Nora, following his gaze, picked it up. It was dirty, but the oilcloth had protected whatever was inside. She untied the leather thong. "What is it?" She unrolled it. It was a map. It was not a new map, printed on fresh paper. It was old, drawn by hand on treated linen. It showed the canyons and the mesas, the lines and elevations drawn with surprising skill. It looked like an old Spanish survey map, or perhaps one from an early government exploration. Nora could make out the general shapes. "This looks like the area around the mission," she murmured. Ash took it from her. His hands, which had just been weapons, were suddenly very gentle. He unrolled it fully. He stared at it, his expression unreadable, but Nora saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. He traced a line with his finger, a line that snaked through a series of canyons she did not recognize. The line ended at a small, blue circle, marked with a symbol. "What is it, Ash? Do you recognize this place?" He was silent for a long time. The wind whistled over their heads. "It is Tudzil Nat O," he said, his voice barely audible. "The spring in the rock, the place where the water always flows." Nora did not understand the words, but she understood the meaning. "A perennial spring here. In this land, water was life. It was gold. It was God." Her mind, quick and practical, leaped ahead. "A spring, Ash, a real spring. We could build the school there. A real school with a foundation. We could pipe the water. It would be clean, no more alkali sickness. We could have a clinic, a real one, for everyone. Your people, my people." She looked up at him, her face shining with a sudden, fierce hope. Ash rolled up the map. He did it slowly, his movements deliberate. He tied the leather thong. When he looked at her, his eyes were not angry. They were filled with a profound, cold dread that chilled her more than the ambush had. "No," he said. "What do you mean? No, it is the answer. It is a curse," he said, his voice hard. "You cannot build there. That land is sacred. It is not for Bilagana houses." "It would be for everyone," she insisted, standing up. "It is a gift." "It is a death sentence," he snapped, standing to face her. "Do you think those men were the last? Do you know what Silas Crowley is building? A mine. A railroad? Those things die without water. He is looking for this. You show this map to anyone, you breathe a word of it, and he will not send 4 men. He will send 40. He will not smash your slates. He will burn your school. He will kill those children. He will slaughter anyone who stands between him and that spring. He held the map out, not to her, but between them. This is what they want. This is why they will come back. Nora's hope turned to ash. He was right. She saw the logic of it, cold and sharp as his knife. This map did not represent salvation. It represented war. Ash looked down the pass. He walked a few yards to where one of the men had stood. He knelt, his fingers brushing the sandstone. He looked at his fingers. They were dark with fresh blood. "One of them is wounded," he said. "They left a trail. A wounded man is an angry man. They will be back, and they will be stronger." He looked at her, and the calculation in his eyes was plain. He was responsible for her now. He had interfered. He had drawn blood. "We cannot stay here," he said, "and you cannot go to your school. It is the first place they will look." "Where do we go?" Nora asked. Ebb was already gathering the mules, his face pale. "The trading post. It is the only place with enough men to make them hesitate." He helped Ebb reload the scattered lumber. The broken slates and scattered books he left, save for the map, which he tucked inside his own shirt. "I will guide you," he said. "We will not take the trail. We will take the washes. It will be slow. We must go now." They traveled for hours, Ash riding his horse ahead, picking a path through a maze of dry riverbeds and high-walled canyons where the wagon could barely pass. The sun beat down, and the only sound was the scrape of the wheels and the click of the mules' hooves. They had to stop as dusk turned the red rock to purple and then to black. The trading post was still miles away. Ash found a defensible spot, a hollow in the rock where a small fire would not be seen from the trail. Ebb fed the mules, his hands still shaking. "That Indian," he muttered to Nora. "He moves like a ghost. I ain't never seen anything like it." Nora sat by the small fire Ash had built, a fire that gave off almost no smoke. She was exhausted, her entire body aching with tension. Ash sat on the other side, his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. He seemed to be listening to the night itself. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the dry mesquite. "Why did you stay?" Nora asked, her voice quiet. "You were watching. You could have let them pass." Ash did not look at her. He stared into the flames. "They were smashing your supplies, the things for the children." "You did not do it for me," she stated. "No," he said. "I did it for the children." Another silence. Nora pulled her shawl tighter. The desert night was cold. "Why are you here, teacher?" Ash asked, his voice unexpectedly soft. He was not looking at her, but the question was aimed at her heart. "This is not your land. Your people sent you, but they do not care what happens here. The settlers. They do not want a school that teaches dying children. My people. They do not trust your books. Why do you stay?" Nora looked at her hands, chapped and scraped from the day's work and the fall. "I was an orphan," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "My mother and father died of consumption when I was 8. I was raised by an aunt who saw me as a burden, a mouth to feed, another dowry to save for." She looked up, meeting his eyes across the fire. "I know what it feels like to be outside, to not have a place, to be the one no one wants. I will not let that happen to those children. Not while I am here. They deserve a place to be safe. That is all I am trying to build." Ash watched her. His face remained impassive, but something in his eyes changed. The hardness, the cold suspicion, softened. He did not speak of his own lost sister, of his own people made orphans in their own land, but the wall between them, the wall of race and history, had a small crack in it. He saw her now, not as a Bilagana, not as a threat, but as a woman, stubborn and foolish and, in her own way, A warrior. He gave a single sharp nod. He understood. They reached the trading post at Tuba City just after dawn. The small, dusty settlement was just waking up. A few men loitered on the porch of the general store. Nora, stiff and covered in dust, slid down from the wagon bench. She was not going to be quiet. "Ring the bell," she called to the man on the porch. "I am calling a town meeting. Everyone needs to hear this." As a man ran to the small bell outside the makeshift church, Nora saw a man step out of the tiny office that said sheriff. He was not the sheriff. He was a deputy, a man she had seen around named Harlan Pike. He was thin, with a weasel's face and eyes that never seemed to settle. He wore his tin star at a lazy angle. Pike ambled over, chewing on a piece of straw. "What is all the fuss? Miss Hayes, you look like you tangled with a coyote." "Worse," Nora said, her voice shaking with contained fury. "We were attacked. 4 men. They said they were from Silas Crowley." Pike's eyes widened, but not with surprise. It was interest. "Crowley, you say that is a big accusation." "They smashed my supplies," she said. "They would have done worse. This man." She gestured to Ash, who stood back by his horse, his face impassive, his hand resting on the animal's neck. "This man saved us." Harlan Pike's gaze slid to Ash. He took in the moccasins, the knife at his belt, the proud, cold way he held himself. Pike's eyes, cunning and small, lingered. He saw an armed Navajo who had, by this woman's account, interfered with white men. "This man," Pike said, drawing the word out. "He was involved." "He saved our lives," Nora repeated, firmly. "I see," Pike said. He gave Ash a thin, oily smile. "Well, we will have to look into that." Ash met the deputy's gaze. He saw the corruption in the man as clearly as he saw the lice on his collar. Harlan Pike was already making calculations. Crowley would want to know this. He would want to know about the teacher, and he would definitely want to know about the armed, dangerous Indian who was protecting her. Pike saw a way to earn a bonus. He saw a way to solve 2 problems at once. He tucked the image of Ash Nez away in his mind, a tool to be used later. The ringing of the iron bell was a harsh, frantic sound against the morning heat. It was not the gentle Sunday call to worship. It was an alarm. People emerged from the saloon, the general store, and the cluster of dusty homes, their faces etched with annoyance and curiosity. Nora Hayes stood by her wagon, her hands clenched at her sides. She was covered in the fine red dust of the high desert, her hair escaping its pins, and a righteous fury burned in her eyes. Ebb, the old driver, was already tending to his mules, muttering about the dangers of hauling for a woman. Ash Nez did not stand with her. He remained by his horse, near the edge of the small clearing that served as a town square. He was a watcher, a man of the periphery. His presence was a silent challenge, and he saw Harlan Pike, the deputy, watching him right back. About 30 people gathered. It was a motley assembly. Mr. O'Malley, the saloon keeper, his white apron already stained. Jedediah Smith, the blacksmith, his massive forearms crossed, his face impatient. Several lean cattlemen, their eyes narrowed, smelling trouble that might affect their grazing rights. And the Reverend Miller, a thin, anxious man who wrung his hands as if washing them. "What is this, Miss Hayes?" the Reverend asked, his voice reedy. "It is not the Lord's day." "I was attacked," Nora said, her voice carrying over the murmurs. It did not tremble. "My wagon was stopped. My school supplies were destroyed. 4 men. They told me to go back east. They told me Mr. Silas Crowley did not want complications." The name landed like a stone in a quiet pond. Crowley. "That's a heavy accusation, ma'am," O'Malley said, shifting his weight. "Silas Crowley is a man of business, not a road agent." "They were his men," Nora insisted. "They knew who I was. They were sent." "Perhaps you misunderstood." one of the cattlemen said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice. "This is rough country." Could have been anyone. "And what of the Navajo?" Harlan Pike called out, his voice oily and loud. He pointed directly at Ash. "You were there. Were you not? Ebb here says you were. What is your part in this? Maybe you planned it. Hey, scare her, then rescue her." Ash's face remained impassive, but his eyes, fixed on Pike, went cold. "He saved our lives," Nora snapped. "He drove them off. He is the only reason we are not dead in a ditch." "So you say," Pike sneered. The argument was about to escalate, the crowd dividing into factions, when a new sound interrupted them. It was the steady, rhythmic clopping of fine horses, pulling something heavy. A carriage, black and polished, rolled into the square. It was so clean it seemed to have materialized from another world, a world without dust. A man stepped out. He was not a desert man. He wore a black wool suit, buttoned tight, and a clean white shirt with a string tie. He was large, not with fat, but with presence. His silver hair thick, his face clean-shaven and smooth. He smiled, a wide, confident expression. This was Silas Crowley. "Good morning, gentlemen and madam," he said, his voice a rich baritone that commanded attention. He nodded to Nora. "I arrived from the railhead last night. I heard the commotion. It seems I am just in time." He walked into the center of the crowd, which parted for him. "I overheard my name," he said, his smile still in place, but his eyes were sharp. "Miss Hayes, I believe the new teacher. I was distressed to hear of your trouble on the road. Truly, this territory is in desperate need of civilizing. Men like that, they are a blight." "They were your men, Mr. Crowley," Nora said, refusing to be charmed. Crowley's smile only tightened a fraction. "A terrible accusation. I employ surveyors and engineers. Ma'am, not highwaymen. Perhaps they were overzealous. If they work for me, I assure you, they will be disciplined. But this chaos is exactly why I am here." He turned, addressing the crowd like a congregation. "This land is dying of thirst," he boomed. "You scratch at the dirt for a handful of corn. You pray for rain while your cattle walk miles for muddy water. You are pioneers, and I respect that. But the pioneer stage is over. It is time for the building stage." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I am not just building a railroad. I am bringing water. I am bringing commerce. I am bringing jobs. Jobs for the blacksmith. Jobs for the teamsters. Wages for your sons. I am building a copper mine that will put this territory on the map. This," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential rumble, "is the future, and I am inviting you all to be my partners." From a leather satchel, he produced a sheaf of papers. "This is a simple right-of-way agreement," he said. "It grants my company, the Arizona Development Corporation, the right to survey and build across certain unused portions of this land. In exchange, the town treasury will receive a share, 10% of all shipping fees originating from this station. It will make you wealthy. It will build your church a new steeple, Reverend. It will build your saloon a new floor, Mr. O'Malley." He was mesmerizing. He was selling them their own dreams, polished and wrapped in paper. Harlan Pike stepped forward. "I have read it, Mr. Crowley. Seems like a solid legal document to me." "Of course it is, Deputy." Crowley beamed. "Wait," Nora said. Crowley turned to her, his patience immaculate. "Yes, Miss Hayes." "You speak of jobs and steeples," she said, her voice clear. "But this town does not need a new steeple. It needs a clinic. It needs a school that does not blow away in the wind. We need clean water, not just water for a steam engine. We need protection." She took a breath, making a decision that would change everything. "Those men were not just stopping me. They were looking for something. There are rumors of a spring in the canyons, a place sacred to the Dane. That water does not belong to a railroad. Mr. Crowley, It belongs to the land. It must be protected, for everyone. A dead silence fell. Nora had spoken the secret. Ash, who had remained as still as a statue, felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. She did not know what she had done. Crowley's eyes, which had been wide and charming, narrowed to glittering points. He had been fishing in a vast, dry lake. Nora Hayes had just told him exactly where the deep water was. A sacred spring, Crowley mused, his voice smooth as silk. How fascinating. A source of superstition, no doubt. It is not superstition, a new voice said. It was low, and it cut through the air like a flint knife. Ashnez stepped forward. He moved from the shadow of the porch into the harsh sunlight. He stopped 10 feet from Crowley. He did not look at the fine suit or the polished shoes. He looked at the man's eyes. The water belongs to everyone, Ash said, his English precise. It is the blood of the mother. You cannot own it. You cannot sell it. He looked around at the settlers, his gaze sweeping over them. You let this man put his steel in the ground. He will own you. Do not let his iron become your chains. The settlers shuffled. They were afraid of Ash. They were awed by Crowley. Ash's words were stark, like the land itself. Crowley's words were soft, like the paper money in their dreams. Crowley laughed. It was a rich, dismissive sound. Chains. You hear him, this savage, who lives in the dirt, speaks to you of chains. I am offering you freedom, the freedom of progress, the freedom of prosperity. He turned his back on Ash, a deliberate, insulting gesture. He looked at the cattleman. Gentlemen, who will build this future with me, who will be the first to sign this agreement, I guarantee. The railroad will buy its beef from the men who sign today, at a very favorable price. That was the hook. Greed, sharp and sudden. One of the cattlemen, a man named Taggart, shoved his way forward. Give me the pen, Mr. Crowley. My herd is dying on the vine. I need that contract. A wise man. Mr. Taggart, Crowley said, offering the pen and the paper, which he rested on the back of his leather satchel. Taggart signed his name with a rough scrawl. Another man followed, and then a third. Jedediah, the blacksmith, hesitated, his face torn. He looked at Nora, then at Crowley. Mr. Smith, Crowley said softly. Think of the steel, the rails, the engines. You will need to hire 10 men. Jedediah wiped his hand on his pants and signed. Mr. O'Malley. It is bad for business to stand in the way of progress. O'Malley grunted, and he signed too. This is a mistake, Nora cried out. You do not know what is in that paper. It is a legal agreement, Miss Hayes, Harlan Pike said, stepping up with an ink stamp from his office. And I am witnessing it as the law in this territory. He slammed the stamp onto the bottom of the page. Legal and binding. Crowley smiled. He had it. He had his legal foothold. He carefully folded the paper and placed it back in his satchel. Thank you, gentlemen. You are the founding fathers of a new Arizona. He tipped his hat. Miss Hayes, I do hope you will stay. A town like ours will need diverting charities. Good day. He climbed back into his carriage. The door shut with a solid, expensive thud. The carriage turned and rolled away, leaving the town square in a cloud of dust and stunned silence. The settlers looked at each other. The high of the moment was gone, replaced by a sour, uneasy feeling. They had signed, but they had a feeling they had just been sold something, not the other way around. Harlan Pike let the silence fester. He knew crowds. He knew anger needed a place to go. He let his gaze drift to Nora. Well, Pike said, his voice casual. He is gone, but the teacher is still here. He turned to O'Malley. Did you hear what she said? O'Malley. She knew about this spring, this sacred spring. O'Malley, smarting from his humiliation by Ash the day before, seized on it. That is right, she did. She was holding out on us. The rumor sparked and caught fire. It moved through the small crowd in seconds. She knew where the water was. She was keeping it for herself and the Indians. "That map," a man yelled. "The one from the wagon, that must have been it." "She has the map to the water." The crowd, which had been unified in fear of Crowley, now unified in anger against Nora. She was the outsider. She was the one who had consorted with the Navajo. She was the one who had hidden the prize. "Where is it, teacher?" Taggart demanded, his face red. "You hiding it, you aiming to sell it yourself?" "No," Nora said, backing against her wagon. "It is not mine, it is—" "It is in her things," O'Malley roared. He was the leader now. "Let's search her wagon. Let's find that map before she gives it all away to him." He pointed at Ash. A half-dozen men surged forward. They were not thinking. They were a mob. Ebb, the old driver, raised a whip handle. "You stand back. This is private property." Taggart grabbed the whip and threw it aside. He shoved Ebb, who fell into the dust. The men advanced on Nora. Ash moved. He did not run. He simply appeared. One moment he was by his horse. The next he was standing between Nora and the mob. He did not draw his knife. He did not raise his voice. He just stood there, a silent, unmovable object. "You will not touch her," he said. His voice was flat. "Get out of our way, Indian." O'Malley snarled. He was emboldened by his new power. He put a thick hand on Ash's chest to shove him aside. "This is white folks' business." Ash did not even look at the hand. He caught O'Malley's wrist. It was not a punch. It was a trap. Ash twisted his own body, using O'Malley's momentum against him, applying pressure to the elbow and shoulder joint. O'Malley cried out, a high, thin squeal, as he was forced to his knees, his arm bent at an angle it was never meant to take. "My arm," he shrieked. "He is breaking it! He is breaking my arm!" "No," Ash said, his voice a cold whisper only O'Malley could hear. "If I were, you would hear the bone." He released him. O'Malley scrambled back, clutching his arm, his face pale with sweat and terror. The mob stopped dead. They had rifles and pistols. But this man, he had disarmed their leader with his bare hands. The raw, civilized violence of a fistfight they understood. This cold, silent control. It was terrifying. Harlan Pike watched from the sheriff's porch, a thin smile on his lips. This was perfect. The town against the Indian. He would let it burn. Into this standoff, a new figure appeared. Haston, the old dying elder, emerged from between two buildings. He had heard the bell and had walked for an hour. He stood at the edge of the crowd, his face serene, his eyes missing nothing. Nora saw him. She saw the greedy, enraged faces of the settlers. She saw Harlan Pike, watching like a vulture. She saw Ash, standing alone, a wall between her and the mob. He was protecting her, but in doing so, he was putting a noose around his own neck. She knew what she had to do. The map was a poison. Ash had told her. It could not stay in the town. It could not stay with her. She took a deep breath. She walked past Ash, who turned his head, his eyes questioning. The crowd tensed, thinking she was running. She went to her wagon. She did not go to her personal bags. She went to the heavy medical box, the one thing the men on the trail had not destroyed. She opened the lid. There, tucked beneath a roll of bandages, was the oilcloth tube. She took it. The crowd watched, their eyes fixed on the map. "Give it here, ma'am," Taggart said, his voice less certain, but still hungry. Nora ignored him. She ignored them all. She walked through the center of the crowd, which parted for her. She walked past Harlan Pike. She walked directly to the old dying man, Haston. She stopped in front of him. She held out the map. "This does not belong to me," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It does not belong to them." She looked into the old man's ancient, knowing eyes. "It belongs to the land. Please, keep it safe." Hastin looked at her. He saw the truth in her. He saw the sacrifice. He saw the choice she had made, a choice that gave up power. He took the map from her hand. He did not open it. He did not look at it. He gave her a single, grave nod of acceptance. Then he looked at Ash, a flicker of pride in his gaze. He turned, his moccasins making no sound on the packed earth, and disappeared. The mob was frozen, stunned, deflated. The prize was gone. Given away. They turned their anger on Nora. "You fool! You gave it to them." "It was not mine to give to you," Nora said. And she walked back to her wagon, her back straight. Harlan Pike was furious. He had lost his leverage. The map was gone, and he could not arrest an entire town for rioting when he had encouraged it. He watched Hastin disappear. The old man was walking toward the canyons. Pike's mind, small and sharp, began to work. He did not need the map, not if he could stake the claim first. He slipped away from the dispersing, grumbling crowd. He found two young men who were part of Crowley's survey crew, lingering by the saloon. One of them was a kid named Tommy, barely old enough to shave. "You boys want to earn a bonus," Pike said, pulling them into the alley. They nodded, their eyes eager. Pike pressed a few silver dollars into their hands. "The old Indian is heading toward the canyons. The spring is out there. I want you to follow him, but do not let him see you. Take the blasting powder from the survey wagon. I want you to set a charge. I want a survey done by sunrise, a loud one. Understand, we are staking Mr. Crowley's claim, with or without a map." Tommy looked nervous. "Blasting, but that is sacred land, ain't it?" "It is company land now," Pike snarled. "The agreement is signed. Now go, and if you see that other Indian, the one who was here, you stay clear. He is mine." The two young men nodded, pocketing the money, and hurried off to gather their supplies. Harlan Pike watched them go, a satisfied smile spreading across his weasel face. The game was afoot. The morning after the town meeting was as sour as old milk. The small community, having tasted its own capacity for mob violence, was sullen and divided. Nora's wagon, still parked by the general store, was a symbol of the trouble. Men who had signed Crowley's paper avoided her gaze. Men who had not looked at her with a mixture of pity and resentment. She was the one who had brought the storm. She would not be defeated. Her supplies, or what was left of them, had to get to the children. The lumber was battered, the slates were gone, but the small pot-bellied stove and the precious medical box remained. As she and Eb prepared to load the wagon for another attempt, a large shadow fell across them. It was Jedediah Smith, the blacksmith. His face was a study in shame, his massive hands opening and closing at his sides. "Miss Hayes," he rumbled, not meeting her eyes. I signed his paper. He promised me steel for the engines. I was a fool." "Many men were," Nora said, her voice tired. "Aye." He took a deep breath. "A man ought to stand for what is right, not just what is profitable. I am riding with you. I will see you and your goods safe to the school. No one will bother you with me along." Nora felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Jedediah. We can use the help." "You will need more than him." Ash Nez emerged from the stable, leading his horse and two of Nora's mules. He had not left. He had been waiting, watching. He knew, better than any of them, that the meeting was not an end. It was a beginning. Pike's eyes are still on you, and he is not the only one. Two more figures appeared, scrambling from behind the water trough. It was Thomas, the settler boy, and Kla, a young Dine student whose family lived near Nora's lean-to. They were perhaps 13, poised awkwardly between boy and man. "We are coming too, ma'am," Thomas said, puffing his chest. "We can help with the mules." "Absolutely not." Nora said, "It is too dangerous." Kla, who rarely spoke English, said, "My father says we must walk with our teacher. It is the way. Ash looked at the boys. He saw their fear, but he also saw their resolve. He gave Nora a slight nod. They will be useful. They know the small trails. We will need them. The wagon was loaded, a smaller, sadder collection of goods than before. They left the trading post at midday. A strange, mixed caravan, a teacher, a warrior, a blacksmith, and 2 boys, one white, one dine. They were a perfect image of the very community Nora was trying to build, and it felt as fragile as a spider's web. Ash led them away from the main road, taking them through a series of winding washes and high-sided trails that Nora had never seen. The progress was slow, the wagon wheels grinding over rock and through deep sand. They stopped to rest the animals in the shade of a high overhang. The heat was oppressive. Nora, who never missed an opportunity, pulled a piece of charcoal from the wagon. She found a flat, smooth stone and, gathering Thomas and Claw, began a lesson. "If I have 10 apples, and I give 3 to Jedediah," she said, drawing circles on the rock, "how many are left?" Thomas answered quickly. "Claw," his eyes on the ground, remained silent. He struggled with the abstract concept of numbers, the foreign symbols. Ash had been watching from a distance, checking the ridgeline. He walked over, his moccasins making no sound. He stood over them, watching the lesson. Nora paused, feeling his critical gaze. He knelt, his movements fluid. He did not look at the charcoal. He pointed to the fine dust near their feet. "This is not a number," he said, his voice quiet. He made a mark in the dust, a small, triangular print with 2 dots behind it. "This is a coyote. He is walking. He is not hungry. His pads are spread wide." He made another mark, a frantic series of small scratches. "This is a rabbit. He is running. He is afraid." He looked at Claw. Which way did he go? Was he here before the coyote? Claw's face lit up. He leaned forward, his black hair falling over his face, and began to read the story Ash was writing. He pointed. "The rabbit was here. The coyote crossed his trail. He is hunting." "Good," Ash said. He looked at Thomas. "Now, you read." Ash spent 10 minutes, his hands moving in the dust, showing them the difference between a shod horse and a mule, how to tell if an animal was wounded, how to read the age of a track by the crumbling of its edges. Nora watched, mesmerized. This was not arithmetic. This was a language, a different kind of literacy, one written on the earth itself. Ash was teaching her, as much as the boys. He was showing her what he valued. And as he spoke, he looked at her, and his eyes acknowledged her own lesson. He saw the worth in her stubborn charcoal, and she saw the deep, complex wisdom in his dust. A fragile bridge of respect was being built between them. The sky, which had been a harsh, cloudless white, began to change. A sickly yellow tinge appeared in the west, and the ever-present wind died, leaving the air heavy and still. Ash stopped, his head lifting. He sniffed the air like an animal. "What is it?" Jedediah asked. "Water," Ash said. Nora looked at him. "But it is not raining. There is not a cloud." "It is raining in the mountains," Ash said, his voice suddenly sharp, urgent. He pointed his chin at the sky, miles to the north, where a dark smudge stained the horizon. "We are in the wash. We must get the wagon to high ground, now." The dry arroyo they had been following seemed safe, its sandy bottom a wide, flat road, but Ash knew it was a death trap. "Hurry!" he yelled. "Jedediah, with me! Get the mules moving!" They scrambled. Jedediah cracked his whip, and Ash pulled on the lead harness. The mules, sensing the panic, became stubborn. The wagon wheels were deep in the sand of the arroyo. They were trying to get it up a steep, crumbling bank. Then they heard it. It was not thunder. It was a low, steady rumble, the sound of 1,000 freight trains approaching. "It is coming!" Ash shouted. The water appeared around the bend. It was not a gentle rise. It was a wall, 5 feet high, brown and churning, filled with branches, dead animals, and the roaring voice of the mountain. It hit the wagon with the force of a battering ram. The heavy wagon spun, the wood groaning. The mules screamed, a sound of pure terror. Kla, who had been trying to push a wheel, was knocked from his feet. The water, icy and powerful, grabbed him. "Kla!" Nora shrieked. The boy was gone, a small head bobbing in the furious brown torrent. Ash was on the other side, cutting his horse free. Jedediah was desperately trying to unhitch the mules, saving the animals. Nora did not think. She ran. She ran along the bank, her heavy skirts dragging in the mud, her eyes locked on the boy. He was being swept downstream at a terrifying speed. He managed to grab a floating log, but it spun and threw him off. Ahead, she saw a cluster of old salt cedar bushes, their roots deep and tangled, clinging to the edge of the wash. She put on a burst of speed, her lungs burning, getting ahead of the boy. She scrambled down the muddy bank, grabbing a thick, woody root with her left hand, and braced herself. "Kla!" she screamed, her voice raw. "Here, grab my hand." The water surged around her legs, trying to pull her in. It was impossibly cold. The boy slammed into her, his small body a dead weight. His hand, slick with mud, found hers. She locked her fingers with his. The force almost tore her arm from its socket, but she held on. She held the root, and she held the boy, the both of them anchors against the flood. The main force of the water roared past, but they were in a small eddy, shielded by the bushes. "We have you," she gasped, her knuckles white. Above them, Ash and Jedediah, having saved the animals, appeared on the bank. Ash had his lariat. He spun it once and threw it. The loop landed perfectly over Nora and the boy. "Hold on!" Ash yelled. She pulled the rope tight around Claw's chest, then took a loop around her own arm. "Pull!" she yelled. The two men hauled, their boots slipping in the mud. They dragged Nora and Claw up the bank, two half-drowned creatures, caked in mud, gasping for air. Nora collapsed on the solid ground, her arms still locked around the boy. She had not let him go. The wagon was gone. The lumber, the stove, all of it swept away. The mules and horses stood trembling, high on the bank. Jedediah pointed. "Wait, look!" Wedged against a sharp outcrop of black shale downstream, the heavy medical box, which Jedediah had lashed to the wagon frame, was visible. The wagon itself was smashed to pieces around it, but the box held. "I will get it," Ash said. He climbed down, the water still high, and made his way across the slick rock. He had to cut the last leather straps holding it. He braced himself against the rock, his knife slicing through the wet leather. Just as the last strap gave, the wreckage of the wagon shifted, its weight groaning. Ash pulled his arm back, but he was too late. A jagged piece of shale, sharp as a razor, sliced his left forearm from wrist to elbow. He cursed, a low, sharp word in Dine. He stood, the medical box in his good hand, and climbed the bank. Blood, dark and steady, dripped from his arm, making bright red splashes on the wet stone. Ash Nora was on her feet, her own terror forgotten. She ran to him. "You are hurt." He instinctively tried to hide the wound. Turning from her, "It is nothing, a scratch." "That is not a scratch," she said. Her voice was not gentle. It was sharp, the voice of a commander. "That is an artery. Jedediah, Claw, build a fire. Thomas, open that box for me, now." The boys, seeing her take charge, jumped. Ash, surprised by her sudden authority, found himself sitting on the rock where she pointed. "Let me see it," she ordered. He showed her the arm. The cut was deep, 4 inches long, and it was bleeding with a rhythm that matched his heart. Nora's hands were shaking from cold and adrenaline, but her mind was clear. She pulled her supplies from the box: clean linen, carbolic soap, the canteen of clean water that had been tied to Ash's own saddle, and her suture kit. "This is going to hurt," she said, her voice softer now. "But I have to clean it, and I have to stitch it, or you will bleed to death, or lose the arm." "I have had worse," he said, his voice tight, his face pale beneath his skin. "Jedediah, I may need you to hold him still." "You will not," Ash said, glaring at the blacksmith. "Good." Nora poured the precious clean water over the wound, washing away the mud and grit. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, but he did not move a muscle. She cleaned it with the soap. "It is deep," she whispered. She looked at the gash, clean to the shining muscle. "I must—" She threaded the curved needle. Her fingers fumbled with the silk, but she got it. "Hold still." She made the first stitch, plunging the needle into his skin. He watched her face, not the wound. He watched her brow furrow in concentration, her wet hair plastered to her face. He saw her bite her lower lip. This was the woman who had cried over broken slates. This was the woman who had thrown herself into a flood to save a child. Now, she was putting him back together. "How do you know this?" he asked, his voice rough, a distraction from the sharp, pulling pain. I read books," she said, her voice focused. "My father was a doctor. He taught me some things." It was a lie, but it was a comfort. "I practiced on chickens, mostly for Sunday dinner." He gave a short, sharp laugh, which was half a gasp of pain. "I am not a chicken, teacher." "No," she said, tying off the stitch. "You are not. Be still." She worked for 10 minutes, her hands becoming steadier with each stitch. 10 clean, tight sutures. He never flinched, but she saw the sweat bead on his forehead. She bandaged the arm tightly with her last roll of clean linen. For a long moment, they just sat there. Her hand was still on his arm. It was the first time they had touched in trust, in care. His skin was warm. He was no longer a symbol, a dangerous warrior. He was a man, and he was hurt. As the sun went down, they made a small, hidden camp. They were all soaked, cold, and defeated. The wagon was gone. The school supplies were gone. Only the medical box and their lives remained. Jedediah and the boys huddled by the fire, drying their clothes. Nora sat a little ways off, staring into the flames. Ash came and sat near her, his bandaged arm held carefully. "You saved the boy," he said. "You risked your life for Kla." "He is one of my students," Nora said simply, as if that explained everything. Ash was quiet for a long time. He looked at his arm, at the white bandage. "I had a sister," he said. The words came out low, as if pulled from the earth. Nora turned to look at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the fire, and at a place 20 years in the past. "She was small, like Nijoni, the girl you helped. It was during the long walk, when the soldiers took us from our land. We were walking in the snow. She was 5 years old. She could not keep up." Nora's hand went to her mouth. "My mother was carrying the new baby. My father was helping my grandmother. I was supposed to. I was holding her hand, but I was so tired. She fell. I tried to go back. A soldier. He hit me with his rifle. He said to keep walking. My father grabbed me. He said she was gone. He said we had to keep walking, or we would all die. I never saw her again." He looked at his hands, as if he could still feel his sister's grip slipping away. "When I saw Kla in the water, I saw her." Nora's heart ached. The wall of coldness he carried, the anger. It was not hate, it was a shroud, wrapped around a wound that had never healed. "Ash," she whispered, "there are no words. I am so sorry." "I do not need your sorrow, teacher," he said, but the bite was gone from his voice. "I know," she said, her own voice thick. "I was 8 when my parents died. Consumption. I was sent to my aunt's house. I was not family. I was a burden, a mouth to feed. I spent 10 years trying to be invisible, trying to be so useful they would not send me to the orphanage." She looked at him, and for the first time, he truly saw her. "I know what it feels like to be left behind. It is why I cannot leave those children. It is why I could not leave Cla." The silence that fell between them was no longer empty. It was filled with a shared understanding, a quiet, terrible grief. They walked the rest of the way, leading the animals. As they got closer to the canyons, Ash grew more tense. He explained things to her in a low voice, as if to distract himself. He pointed to a small pile of stones, a prayer shrine. "Do not take pictures of such things." "I have a camera," Nora admitted. "I was going to take a picture of the spring to send back east, to show them the beauty, to raise money for the school." Ash stopped, his face hard. "No, never. You must promise me. The Bilagana. You make images. You think it means you own a thing. That place is not to be owned. It is not to be stolen. To make an image of it steals its spirit." "I promise, Ash," she said, humbled. "I will not." As they cleared the last ridge, they saw it. Smoke, not the thin blue wisp of a chimney. This was a thick black pillar of greasy smoke, climbing into the clean sky. "Stay here," Ash commanded. He left his horse and ran, disappearing into the junipers. He was back in 15 minutes. His face was a mask of cold, controlled rage. "It is Taggart's line cabin," he said. "The cattleman who signed Crowley's paper first. It is burned flat. His herd, scattered. Many shot." "Oh, God," Jedediah breathed. "Crowley's men." "It is made to look like a raid," Ash said. He held up a broken arrow, fletched in the Dine style. "I found this. It is a lie. The tracks are shod horses, coming from the trading post. They are blaming my people." They reached the lean-to school an hour later. It was untouched. For now. Cla and Thomas ran to their families, who were weeping with relief, hailing them as survivors of the flood. Jedediah, his face grim, turned his mule back toward the post. "I am going back. Taggart was a fool, but he did not deserve this. The town must know. This is Crowley's work, not the Navajo." "It is a lie," Nora said, her fury returning. "I will go with you. I will not let them do this. I will ride to the marshal at Fort Defiance myself." "No." Ash's voice was final. He was checking his rifle, his movements quick and economical, despite his bandaged arm. "What do you mean, no?" she demanded. "We have to report this." "You cannot go," he said, his eyes scanning the canyons above them. "You are the target. Pike wants you silenced. Crowley wants you gone. You will not make it 5 miles on that road." "And you?" she asked, a new fear gripping her. "Where are you going?" He looked at her, his black eyes flat and hard. "The fire is a diversion. It is to pull everyone's eyes south, to Taggart's ranch. But the real prize is not there. It is north, the spring, Pike's men. Tommy, they are already there. Haston is an old man. He cannot stop them alone." "You are going alone," she gasped. "Against how many they will kill you. They will call you a murderer." "I will not let them put their black powder in the water," he said. "I will not let them poison the mother." He turned to swing onto his horse. "Ash, wait!" she cried, desperate. He paused, looking at her. She looked around, frantic. Her supplies were gone. The wagon was gone. Her school was just a piece of canvas. She had nothing. Her eyes fell on the hem of her petticoat, the blue calico ruffle she had torn to bandage Najoni. It was caked with mud and torn from the flood. It was all she had left. She ripped another, cleaner strip free. She stepped toward him. He was tall, formidable, a warrior going to a fight he could not win. She was not afraid of him. "You are not a ghost," she said, her voice shaking but fierce. "You are a man. If they find you dead up there, they will say the savage was guilty of the fire. They will have their excuse. You cannot go there to die. You have to go there to win." She took his heavy knife from the sheath at his belt. Before he could stop her, she tied the scrap of blue cloth tightly around the handle, near the hilt. He stared at it, his hand hovering over hers. "What is this, a prayer?" "It is a reminder," she said, meeting his gaze, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "It is not thine. It is not white. It is ours. It is to remember that someone trusts you, that I trust you. Come back, Ash, come back." He looked at the blue cloth, the color of the sky, tied to his weapon. He felt the warmth of her hand on his, the impossible, foolish weight of her trust. It was a burden heavier than any he had ever carried, and yet it made him feel strong. He slid the knife back into its sheath. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice rough. "Keep the children safe. Do not leave this place, no matter what you hear." He swung onto his horse, his new bandage a stark white, the blue cloth a flash of brilliant color. He did not look back. He rode hard, not toward the fire, but toward the high, secret canyons. The news of Taggart's burned ranch hit the trading post like a lightning strike on dry grass. Jedediah Smith, his face ashen, delivered the report, and Harlan Pike, who had been waiting on the saloon porch, immediately took control. "It is a raid," Pike announced, his voice carrying the weight of false authority. "Dine, just as I warned." "But Ash said," Jedediah began, but his voice was drowned out. Ash Pike seized the name. The warrior, the one who attacked O'Malley. He was seen, riding from the flames. The lie took root, fed by the dry, terrified tinder of the settlers' hearts. The community, which had been simmering in suspicion, now boiled over into open hostility. When Nora sent Thomas to the general store for a small bag of flour and salt, the proprietor, Mr. Harris, blocked the doorway. "I am not selling to her," Harris said, his voice flat and cold. He looked past Thomas to Claw, who stood a few feet behind him. "Not while she is feeding them. She consorts with killers. She is a danger. Tell her she is not welcome here." Thomas returned to the lean-to, his face pale, the precious bag of flour still in his hand. "Unsold." "Ma'am," he said, his voice trembling. He said you are a danger." Nora felt the walls closing in. The community she had risked everything to build was turning on her, one by one. The next day, Pike returned. He was not alone. He brought the Reverend Miller, whose thin face was pinched with moral anxiety, and a silent, glowering Silas Crowley. They rode straight to the lean-to. The children, who had been gathered for a morning lesson, scattered like quail. "Miss Hayes," Pike said, dismounting. He did not remove his hat. "This is not a social call." "I am aware," Nora said. She stood straight, her hands clasped to stop them from shaking. "A terrible, savage act," Crowley murmured, looking at the ashes of Taggart's distant ranch, though only the smoke stain was visible. "It seems your friends are more dangerous than you believed." "They are not my friends who did this," Nora said, her eyes on Pike. "You know that." "What I know," Pike said, "is what I find." He walked past her, his boots heavy, toward Claw's family hogan, which stood a few hundred yards away. "We are conducting a search. We must ensure the raiders are not hiding among the innocent." "You have no right," Nora said, following him. "I have this right," Pike said. He stopped by the small, neatly stacked wood pile. He reached behind it and pulled out a small, heavy canvas sack. He opened it, pouring the contents onto the ground. Sticks of dynamite, a box of blasting caps. Claw's mother, who had come out to see the men, let out a small, terrified cry. Found, Pike announced, his voice loud enough for the Reverend to hear. Hidden. The very same type stolen from Mr. Crowley's survey wagon last week. You planted that! Nora's voice was a raw shout. That is a lie. I've been here. His family was here. You... Miss Hayes. The Reverend Miller interrupted. His hand raised. He looked profoundly sad. This is damning. First the fire, now this, the dynamite to start it. Perhaps hidden at the home of one of your own pupils. This is not evidence. It is a fabrication. It is enough, Crowley said, his voice a soft, reasonable blade. Miss Hayes, I think you need to come back to the post. Answer some questions. For your own safety, of course. We must get to the bottom of your involvement. The interrogation took place in the saloon. It was hot, and the air smelled of stale beer and fear. O'Malley wiped the same spot on the bar, over and over, his eyes fixed on Nora. Jedediah sat in a dark corner, his massive form slumped, his face buried in his hands. Ma'am, the Reverend began, your moral compass seems compromised. You associate freely with the Dine, against the counsel of your own people. They are my people too, Nora retorted. They are children. They are families. They are savages, O'Malley spat, led by that murdering buck who broke my arm. The one who saved my life, she countered, her voice low. The one, Harlan Pike said, leaning forward, who is now the primary suspect in an arson and murder investigation. Nora's blood ran cold. Murder. Taggart's ranch hand, Pike said, his eyes flat and dead. Found in the ashes. Shot. We have a witness. Saw a Navajo warrior riding hard from the flames. He paused, letting the lie settle. A tall warrior, carrying a knife, with a scrap of blue cloth tied to the handle. The breath left Nora's lungs. Her gift, her sign of trust. They had twisted it into a hangman's noose. We are issuing a warrant for his arrest, Pike said, dead or alive, and for anyone found aiding him. That is a federal crime. Miss Hayes, aiding a fugitive. Where is he? I do not know, she whispered. It was the truth. You should go back east, child, the Reverend said, his voice holding a thin pity. You are not made for this place. You are endangering this entire community with your willfulness. No, Nora said, her voice finding its steel. I am not leaving. Ash knew they were hunting him. He had seen the tracks of the shod horses, 3 of them, pushing deep into the high canyons. They were not trackers. They were loud and clumsy, but they had rifles, and they were relentless. He was high above Todzil Nato, the sacred spring where he had found Haston. The old man was in a small, dry cave, the map safe, his presence a silent prayer. Ash had become a ghost. He used the ancient handholds, the secret paths. He let them see a footprint here, a broken branch there, leading them away from the spring, deeper into the maze. They were trying to trap him, but they were the ones in his trap. He saw the glint of a rifle barrel as one of the men looked up. A shot cracked, the bullet screaming off the rock, showering his hiding place with red dust. They were not trying to arrest him. They were trying to kill him. He was forced to retreat, moving deeper into the network of canyons, putting distance between the hunters and the water. He was alone. He knew, with a cold certainty, that they would blame him for the fire. He knew his act of saving Nora had sealed his fate. He would not be taken. He would make his stand here, in the land of his ancestors. He would die protecting the water. Nora was a prisoner. Pike had sent her back to the lean-to for her protection. 2 of Crowley's hired guns were camped by the only road, their rifles visible. They were her jailers. She sat in the darkness of the lean-to, defeated. They had twisted her hope, her trust, her teaching. She looked at her small, leather-bound ledger, where she kept notes on the children's progress. It was a logbook of her days. Her eyes scanned the pages, looking for something, an answer. Entry day of the fire. Jedediah had left at mid-morning. The fire had been seen at dusk. Entry day before. Cla's father had been stacking wood all morning. All morning. She looked at the entry. Tuesday. Cla's father finished the wood pile. 10 o'clock. Pike had found the dynamite on Wednesday. It was not proof, it was just a fact. But it was a fact that did not fit Pike's story. She needed someone to tell. Jedediah. He was her only hope. He was a weak man, consumed by guilt. If she could only reach him. She waited. The night was moonless, the stars sharp and cold. The guards by the road were drinking, their laughter coarse. A sound, a tiny pebble, striking the canvas wall. Nora froze. "Miss Hayes," a voice whispered, shaking. She moved to the back of the lean-to, where the canvas was loose. It was Tommy, the young surveyor. His face was a pale smudge in the dark, his eyes wide with terror. "What are you doing?" she whispered, pulling him inside. "They will kill you if they see you." I had to," he stammered, his body shaking. "I cannot. God forgive me. I cannot." "What is it? Tommy?" "It is all lies," he choked out, the words tumbling over each other. "Taggart's hand, the one they said was murdered. His name was Ben. He was one of us. He was setting the fire. Pike told him to, but something went wrong. The dynamite. It went off too soon. It caught him. Ben, he was burned, but he was alive." Nora's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. "And Pike," Tommy was sobbing now. "Pike rode up, and Ben was begging, and Pike shot him. He shot him in the head. He said it was cleaner, to make it look like the raid." Nora felt bile rise in her throat. This was not greed. This was pure evil. "And the dynamite here?" she asked, her voice a hollow whisper. "I did it," he confessed. "I planted it. Pike made me. He said it was just to scare you, to get you to leave. He said no one would get hurt, but they are hunting that man, the Navajo. They are going to kill him, and that is not all." "What?" Nora grabbed his arm. "The spring, it is not just a hunt. It is the blast. They are not surveying. They are going to blow the canyon wall. Pike and Crowley. They say it will. It will seal the spring, divert the water table. They said, make it come up on Crowley's new property, miles from here. Poison the mother," Nora whispered, the words Ash had spoken coming back to her. "When? Tommy, when?" "Tonight," he said, his voice cracking. "The new moon. It is the darkest night. They are moving the powder up there right now. They are going to light the fuse at midnight. That is why they sent the hunters. To kill the Navajo. To say he was the one who did it. That he blew the spring out of spite." He grabbed her hand, his own cold and slick. "You have to run. Miss Hayes, they are not going to let you live either. Once the spring is gone and Ash is dead, you are the last witness." He slipped out, a ghost in the dark, leaving Nora alone in the suffocating silence. Run. He wanted her to run, to save herself, to be the invisible orphan girl again, surviving by not being seen. She stood for a full minute, her heart a cold, hard stone. Then she looked at the empty benches where her students sat. She thought of Ash, alone in those canyons, hunted. She thought of the blue cloth on his knife. It is to remember that someone trusts you. She would not run. She would not break that trust. She moved, her defeat burned away by a cold, pure rage. She slipped out the back. Thomas and Cla were where they always were, hiding in a small gully, watching over her. They were her honor guard. "I need you," she said. They did not hesitate. "We have to go to the spring. We have to warn Ash." "The guards," Thomas whispered, pointing to the campfire by the road. "We are not going by the road," Nora said, her voice as hard as the stones beneath her feet. Kla, you know the goat trails, the high ones, the ones that go above the canyon. Can you lead us? Kla nodded, his eyes bright in the dark. He was no longer a boy. He was a guide. They moved like shadows, 3 small figures against the vast, indifferent landscape. They did not speak. The only sounds were the scrape of their shoes on rock in the rising wind. They climbed, leaving the road and the world of men far below, ascending into the high, cold darkness of the mesas under a moonless sky. The climb was a nightmare. It was not a trail. It was a memory of one. They used hands and knees, the sharp rock scraping her palms and tearing her skirt. A cold, fine mist began to fall. Not rain, but a chilling moisture that made the shale slick and treacherous. They reached the high ridge overlooking the spring just minutes before midnight. The air was thin and freezing. Below them, in the basin, they saw the dull yellow glow of 2 shielded lanterns. Perhaps 8 men. They were working quickly, unspooling a long, black fuse, tamping sticks of dynamite into the fissures of the rock wall that held the spring. "We are too late," Nora whispered, her heart breaking. A hand, hard as iron, clamped over her mouth, dragging her back from the ledge. She screamed, but the sound was smothered against a rough palm. "Be silent," a voice hissed in her ear. "Ash." He released her, and she collapsed against the rock. Gasping, he was caked in mud, his bandaged arm stained dark with fresh blood. But he was alive. His face, in the faint starlight, was a mask of cold fury. "What are you doing?" he whispered, his voice a low, shaking snarl. "I told you to stay. I told you to keep the children safe. I am dead, and you bring them here. You are a fool. Woman." "You are not dead yet," she whispered back, her own fear replaced by a sudden, fierce anger. "And we are not fools. Tommy told us. They are not just hunting you. They are blowing the spring. Tonight, now." His fury vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp understanding. He had thought he was fighting a few hired guns. This was an army. This was an execution. "Tommy." "He confessed. He planted the dynamite. He told me everything. The fire. Taggart's man. All of it. They are sealing the water. Ash, they are going to kill the spring." They stared down at the men. They were laughing, talking loudly, their work almost done. One of them held a length of fuse, ready to light. 8 men, Ash said, his voice flat. "All armed. I have a rifle and 6 cartridges. This is suicide." "No," Nora said. She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his good one. "No more dying. My promise. You have to win, not just fight." "How?" he hissed, the word hopeless. "Look at them." "They are not soldiers," Nora said, her mind racing, the cold air making her sharp. "They are miners and hired guns. They are afraid of this place in the dark. They are afraid of you. They have rifles." "We have the high ground," she said, "and the wind. It is blowing down into the canyon." He looked at her, and in the darkness, he saw it, the plan. "They need a spark," Nora whispered, "to light that fuse. In this mist, their matches will be wet." "They will use a blasting cap," he said. "We have to stop them from lighting it. We cannot shoot them." "We cannot shoot first," Ash corrected, his hand going to his knife. "No," Nora insisted, her voice absolute. "We do not shoot at all. We are not murderers. Ash, we are saving the water." She looked at the ground, at the piles of damp leaves and wet juniper branches from the mist. "Smoke," she whispered. "Wet smoke. And sand. Look, the fuses are spread out, leading to the main charge." "We can wet the powder. Cut the fuses." "It is too far," Ash said. "They will see us." "Then we make them blind," she said. Their eyes met in the dark. The vow was made without a word. "Kla, Thomas," Ash whispered, all business now. Go to the other side of the ridge. Stay low. Gather all the wet leaves you can, all the green branches. Do not make a fire. Make 2 piles. When I give the hawk's cry, light them, make smoke, as much smoke as you can." The boys nodded, their faces pale but set. They disappeared like small ghosts. Ash turned to Nora. "They will shoot at the smoke. They will think it is an attack." "And while they are shooting," she said, "you will go for the fuses. And "You will stay here," he commanded. "I will not," she said, her voice as hard as his. "You are wounded. You cannot be in 2 places at once. The fuses are spread out. 1 to cut, 1 to pour sand. You need 2. He looked at her, this impossible, stubborn teacher from the East, her clothes torn, her hands bleeding, ready to face 8 armed men. He had never seen anyone, man or woman, with more courage. He looked at his knife, at the scrap of blue cloth tied to the handle. It was soaked from the mist, but it was still blue. "It is to remember that someone trusts you." "Stay behind me," he said, his voice rough. "When the smoke is thick, we move. We go for the fuses and the powder crates. We pour sand, and we do not make a sound." He drew the knife from its sheath. It was not a promise of violence. It was a tool. They crouched in the freezing mist, 2 shadows on the ridge, waiting. The fate of the canyon, the fate of his people, and the fate of their own lives. It all came down to a handful of wet leaves and a woman who refused to run. The rock was slick with a moisture that was not quite rain. It was a cold, high-altitude mist that clung to every surface, making the sandstone treacherous in the dark. Below, in the basin of Tadzil-Nat-O, the yellow lanterns of Harlan Pike's crew cast greasy, dancing shadows. 8 men. They were working with a grim efficiency, planting the last of the dynamite. The air was sharp with the smell of ozone and damp earth. Nora Hayes and Ash Nez crouched behind a low wall of rock on the ridge, their breath pluming in the frigid air. They were 100 feet above the spring. Ash pointed, his bandaged arm a pale slash in the dark. "There," he whispered. "The main fuse line. It runs from that crate to the wall. They will light it there." Nora nodded, her heart a cold drum against her ribs. She could hear the faint, sharp click of a metal cap being crimped onto a fuse. They were seconds away. "The boys," she whispered. Ash put 2 fingers to his lips and let out a sound. It was not a hawk's cry, as they had planned. That would be too loud, too revealing. This was the thin, scraping call of a night insect, a sound so natural it blended with the wind. He repeated it 3 times. They waited. 1 second, 2. Across the small canyon, on the opposite ridge, a small spark flared and was instantly smothered. Then another, a thin, acrid tendril of smoke rose, catching the faint starlight. It was green juniper and wet leaves. It did not burst into flame. It smoldered, thick and white. A moment later, a second column of smoke rose, 20 yards from the first. "They have seen it," one of the men below shouted. He pointed, "Up there on the ridge." "It is him, the Indian," another man yelled, raising his rifle. "Hold your fire, you fools!" Harlan Pike's voice cut through the panic. "It is a diversion. Light the damn fuse. Light it now." One man, the one with the crimpers, fumbled with a match. It sputtered and died in the damp air. "The caps! Idiot, use the cap lighter!" Pike roared. This was the moment. "Now," Ash said. He began to move, not down the main path, but sideways, along a narrow, cracked ledge that led to a steeper incline. "Stay flat to the rock. Follow my feet." Nora followed, her hands raw, her torn skirt catching on every snag. She moved, one agonizing step at a time, her eyes only on the back of Ash's moccasins. The smoke from the boys' fires was rolling down into the basin, pushed by the wind. Just as she had predicted, it was not a fog, but it was enough to confuse, to sting the eyes, to make the shadows deeper and more menacing. Below, the men were coughing. A rifle shot cracked, The sound enormous, slamming against the rock walls. The man was shooting at the smoke. "Stop wasting lead!" Pike screamed. Nora took one more step. Her foot landed on a patch of slick, black lichen. It was like stepping on wet glass. Her boot skidded. She made no sound. A gasp caught in her throat. She fell, her body swinging out over the black emptiness. Her right hand, scraped and bleeding, shot out, her fingers catching the sharp edge of the ledge. She was hanging, 100 feet of cold. Dark air was between her and the rocks below. She felt the stone cutting into her fingers. She could not get a purchase with her feet. Her other hand clawed at the slick wall. Ash was 3 feet ahead. He heard the scrape. He turned. He saw her, a dark shape against the paler stone, her body suspended. Her fingers were white, her knuckles straining. He moved back. He did not lunge. He flowed, his body flat to the rock. He reached her. He did not grab her outstretched hand. He knew that would pull them both off. He bypassed her hand and grabbed her wrist, his grip a band of steel. "I have you," he gritted, his voice low and terrible. He anchored himself, his left foot finding a purchase in a crack. He leaned back, using his entire body as a counterweight. The strain on his wounded left arm must have been agony, but he made no sound. "Let go," he commanded. "What?" she gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "Let go of the rock. With your other hand, I cannot pull you up if you are spread flat." She was dangling from his one good arm and the bleeding fingers of her own. To let go. It was an act of impossible trust. "Trust me, Nora, let go." She did. Her body swung free, a dead weight on his arm. He grunted, the sound ripped from his chest. He hauled, his muscles straining, his feet scraping. He pulled her upward, inch by inch, his grip on her wrist like a vice. She clawed at the rock with her free hand, finding a hold. He got his other hand under her arm, and with a final, desperate heave, he pulled her over the lip of the ledge. She collapsed against him, shaking so violently her teeth chattered. She was alive. She was solid. She was breathing in ragged, painful sobs against his chest. He held her. He did not pat her back. He simply held her, his arm like an iron bar around her, pressing her against the rock wall, shielding her with his own body. He was trembling, not from the cold, but from a rage and terror so profound it shook his very bones. He had almost lost her. He had almost watched her fall. This stubborn, foolish, impossible woman who had tied a scrap of her clothing to his knife. The barrier in his chest, the one he had built 20 years ago over his sister's lost body, the one he had reinforced with hate and distrust and silence. It did not just crack. It shattered. It was gone. He buried his face for 1 second in her damp, wild hair, inhaling the smell of her, the smell of fear and pine and life. "You deserve better," he whispered. His voice choked, the words torn from him. Nora, her face pressed against the rough wool of his shirt, went still. She could feel the violent hammering of his heart against her own. He pulled back, just enough to see her face in the faint, smoky light. His eyes, those black, guarded eyes, were stripped bare. They were filled with a raw, agonizing light. He was a man of the desert. He did not have the soft, easy words of the East. He had only the truth. "A virgin like you," he said, his voice rough as the stone, "deserves me." Nora's mind, still reeling from the fall, fought to understand. It was not a boast. It was not an insult. It was the bluntest, most powerful statement he could make. It was not a claim of ownership. It was a vow. He was telling her that she, a woman of honor and goodness, deserved a man who would match that honor, a man who would not abandon her, a man who would die for her. He was telling her that he was that man. "Ash," she breathed, her hand coming up to his face. "I will not let you fall," he said, as if that explained it all. "Forever. Forever." The word hung in the cold, misty air between them. If, Nora said, her voice shaking, but her gaze as steady as his. If forever is a choice, then it must be equal. No one owns anyone. Ash, I will not be a burden, and I will not be a prize. You are neither, he said. You are Di-ashtla, he said the dying word. The one I walk beside. He looked at her, and his eyes softened. He understood her terms. He accepted. He reached for the knife at his belt, the one with her blue cloth tied to the hilt. He did not pull the blade. He fumbled with the knot, the cloth wet and tight. His fingers, rough and calloused, worked it free. He took the scrap of blue calico. He looked at it. Then, he took his own left wrist, the one with her stitches, the one with the bandage stained dark. He wrapped the cloth around his own arm, over the bandage, and tied a tight, final knot. He was no longer her protector. She was no longer his burden. They were bound. A shout from below broke the spell. The horses, they are loose. Someone cut the picket line. Ash grinned. It was a fierce, sudden expression that transformed his face. My first move. He had known the crew would tether their horses together. He had slipped away while Nora talked to Tommy and cut the line. Now, the second. He looked up. The boys are doing their job. The smoke in the basin was thick now. Men were coughing, their eyes streaming. The fuse, Pike roared again. Light it! We cannot see, the smoke is too thick. Then find the cap box, I will light it here. Ash looked at Nora. It is time. You, for the powder bags. Sand. I, for the cap box. Wait, Nora said. She reached into the pocket of her torn skirt. She pulled out a small, simple wooden flute. One of her students had given it to her. What is that for? Ash whispered. A diversion, she said. She put it to her lips and played a single, high, clear note. It was not a bird. It was not the wind. It was a sound that did not belong. High and mournful, cutting through the smoke. The men below froze. What in God's name was that? One whispered. It is a signal, Pike hissed. They are up there. Fire into the smoke. 3 rifles opened up, their flashes illuminating the swirling, acrid cloud. The bullets screamed, ricocheting wildly off the canyon walls. Now, Ash said. He was gone. He did not run. He dropped from the ledge, using the cover of their own gunfire, and slid down a chute of loose scree, landing silently in the thickest part of the smoke. Nora, right behind him, went the other way, scrambling toward the open powder bags. Ash moved like a panther. The men were blinded, shooting at shadows. He saw Pike, standing by the main crate, fumbling with the blasting cap box. Ash came up behind him. He still had his knife in his hand. Pike sensed him. He spun, his revolver clearing its holster. He pointed it directly at Ash's chest. I knew it, Pike snarled, his weasel face contorted with hate. End of the line. Savage. Ash did not move. He stood, his knife held low, the blue cloth on his wrist a flag of defiance. He did not raise the blade. He would not shoot. He had promised. Pike's finger tightened on the trigger. Drop it! Harlan! A voice yelled from the smoke. Pike hesitated, his eyes flicking. Who is that, Tommy? I said drop it. Tommy stepped out of the smoke, his face pale, his hands shaking, but his rifle was steady. He was not aiming at Pike. He was aiming at the sky. You little traitor, Pike snarled, turning his gun toward the boy. He never got the chance. Ash moved, not with his knife, but with his body. He slammed his shoulder into Pike, driving him away from the boy, away from the fuse. The 2 men crashed onto the rocky ledge, inches from the sheer drop. Pike's gun went skittering into the darkness, but he was strong, wiry and desperate. He clawed at Ash's face, his other hand going for Ash's knife. Ash did not fight him. He grabbed Pike's wrist, the one reaching for the knife. They were locked, hand to hand, muscle against muscle, balanced on the very edge of the abyss. Pike was trying to push him over. Ash was trying to hold him. It was a test of pure strength. Nora, hearing the struggle, had dumped a full bag of sand onto the open powder kegs, ruining them. She looked up and saw the two men silhouetted against the smoky light, locked in a deadly embrace. "Ash!" she screamed. At that moment, Tommy, seeing his chance, fired his rifle. He did not shoot Pike. He shot up into the air. The warning shot, sharp and final. That was the breaking point. The other men in the crew, already terrified by the smoke, the ghost flute, and the stampeding horses, heard the shot. They saw their leader wrestling with a Navajo warrior on the edge of a cliff. They saw a woman emerge from the smoke, pouring sand on their powder. And they saw one of their own, Tommy, holding a rifle. It was too much. This was not a survey. This was a war. "I am not paid for this," one man yelled. He threw down his rifle and ran, scrambling into the darkness toward the trail. "Me neither," another followed. In seconds, the crew had broken. They were just hired men, and their nerve was gone. Pike saw it. He saw his men deserting him. He gave one last furious shove, but Ash's grip was like iron. Jedediah Smith, Clah, and Thomas burst from the trail, drawn by the shot. The blacksmith was carrying a heavy hammer. Pike froze. It was over. Ash twisted the man's arm, forcing him to his knees. He grabbed the cap box from Pike's belt. He had the caps. Nora had the powder. "Look," Tommy said, pointing to the ground near the crate. It was Pike's satchel, spilled open from the fight. Inside was a neatly folded paper. Nora grabbed it. It was not just a map. It was a written plan, signed by Crowley, detailing the accidental diversion of the spring and the plan to blame the Dine for the sabotage. They had it. They had the fuses, the caps, the powder, and the proof. Harlan Pike knelt in the dirt, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his small eyes the ring of faces surrounding him. Ash Nez stood over him, his chest heaving. He looked at Nora. She was covered in mud, her face smudged with sand, her hair wild. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Their eyes met over the kneeling form of their enemy. The vow they had made on the ledge above, in the face of death, was now sealed in the cold, misty air of the canyon. It was no longer a promise. It was a responsibility. And it had just begun. "He is gone." Ash's voice was a flat statement of fact in the cold, damp basin. Harlan Pike, in the confusion of the crew's flight and the arrival of Jedediah's party, had evaporated into the darkness. He had not run with his men. He had simply vanished. Nora stood, her hands trembling, holding the muddy, stiff paper she had pulled from Pike's satchel. By the wavering light of the abandoned lantern, she smoothed it out. Her breath caught. "Ash," she said, her voice thin. "It was not just the spring. It was never just the spring." He came to her side. The adrenaline was fading, and she could see the pain in his face as he favored his wounded arm. He looked at the paper. "This is a schedule," she whispered, her finger tracing a line of neat ink. "It is a contingency plan. Phase 1, Todzil Nat O. If Canyon Spring fails, proceeding with Phase 2. Ash, it is timed for dawn." Dawn. Jedediah Smith rumbled, stepping closer, his hammer still in his hand. "That is less than 3 hours from now." "What is Phase 2? Ash asked, his eyes hard. Nora read, her voice shaking with a new, cold horror. "Freight manifest. 7 o'clock arrival. 4 crates. Blasting powder. Assigned to Harlan Pike." She looked up, her eyes wide. "He is not just running. Ash, he is on his way to his next target, the freight train, the one from the east." "The wooden bridge," Ash said, the words like stones. He meant the massive trestle bridge over the deep arroyo, the one that was the town's only artery to the world. If he destroys the bridge, he isolates the town completely, Nora finished, her mind racing. And the paper says, evidence of Dine sabotage will be placed at the scene. Taggart's ranch was the excuse. The spring was the prize. But this is the main event. He is going to destroy the town and blame your people. He is trying to start a war. A terrible silence fell, broken only by the quiet gurgle of the saved spring. I must stop that train, Ash said. He looked toward the mesas. I can ride. My horse is fast. If I cut across the high ridges, I might beat him to the signal box. I can stop it before it reaches the bridge. And I am going back to the trading post, Nora said, her resolve hardening like steel. She held up the damning paper. This is the proof. Pike is a murderer, and Crowley ordered it. I am waking up the Reverend. I am finding the justice of the peace. I know Judge Harrison is visiting from Prescott. He is staying at the hotel. We are stopping this legally while you stop it physically. Nora, it is too dangerous, Ash said, his good hand moving to her arm. Crowley is there. He will not let you. Crowley is a bully, she said, pulling away, her eyes flashing. He relies on fear and shadows. It is time he faced the light. I will go with you, Miss Hayes, Jedediah said. His voice was grim, his guilt for signing Crowley's paper now a palpable force. The town needs to hear this. Tommy, you too, you are the witness. Tommy, who had been standing silent, his face pale, nodded. I will tell them. I will tell them what I saw. I will tell them Pike shot Ben. Cla, Ash said, turning to the young Dine boy. Go to Hastin. He is hidden in the upper caves. Tell him the spring is safe. For now. Tell him the fight has moved to the town. Tell him to watch the sky for smoke. Go. The boy nodded once and disappeared into the rocks. Ash turned back to Nora. The darkness was absolute, but they could feel the gaze of the other. There was no time for the words that hung between them. He looked at the blue cloth tied around his arm. Ride fast, teacher, he said, his voice rough. You too, Ash, she whispered. Come back. He swung onto his horse, the animal weary but sensing the urgency. He did not look back, but spurred the horse into a hard run, a lone rider disappearing into the last remnants of the night, racing the dawn. Nora, Jedediah, and Tommy reached the trading post as the sky was just beginning to bruise with a faint, pale gray. The small town was silent, asleep. Nora did not care. She went straight to the small, neat house that belonged to the Reverend Miller and banged on the door with both fists. Reverend, wake up, there is a murder. The town is in danger. The door opened, revealing the Reverend, his thin hair askew, his nightshirt tucked into his trousers. His face was a mask of sleepy confusion and alarm. Miss Hayes, what is this madness? It is not yet 5 o'clock. The madness is Silas Crowley, she said, pushing past him into the small parlor. Jedediah, go to the hotel. Get Judge Harrison. He is the only real law within 100 miles. Bring him. Tell him it is a matter of life and death. Tommy, stay with me. 15 minutes later, a small, grim assembly stood in the lobby of the town's only hotel. Judge Harrison, an old man with a face like dried leather and eyes as sharp and clear as a winter morning, stood behind the check-in desk, which he was using as a makeshift bench. He was fully dressed. He had seen trouble before. Nora laid the muddy, wrinkled paper on the desk. This is a confession, Judge, she said, her voice clear and without a tremor. Signed by Silas Crowley, it details a plan to destroy the town bridge, to murder civilians, and to blame the Dine people. This is preposterous, the Reverend stammered, wringing his hands. It is murder, Tommy said, his voice cracking, but he stood tall. I saw it. I saw Harlan Pike shoot Ben, Taggart's ranch hand. After the fire, Pike shot him, to silence him. And he was acting on Mr. Crowley's orders. The judge read the paper, his expression unreadable. He traced the signature. These are profound allegations, Miss Hayes, and ones I am happy to refute. Silas Crowley stood in the doorway. He was immaculate, as always, his silver hair perfectly combed, his black suit brushed. He smiled, a wide, confident expression. "Judge Harrison, a pleasure," he said, striding into the room. "I am sorry you have been woken by this disturbance. I see this unstable young woman is continuing her fantasies." "Mr. Crowley," the judge said, his voice cold. He did not look up from the paper. "This document bears your signature. It details a plan to destroy the rail bridge." "A forgery," Crowley said, waving his hand dismissively. "Or perhaps a business plan, stolen and wildly misinterpreted by a hysterical woman and a half-wit, lying boy. A shame. Really?" "I saw you," Tommy shouted, his fear finally breaking into rage. "I heard you give Pike the orders you told him Taggart's man was a necessary loss." "Silence, boy," Crowley commanded, and Tommy flinched. Crowley turned his full attention to Nora. His smile was gone, replaced by a cold, reptilian focus. "Miss Hayes, your contract with the missionary board is a tenuous one. I have friends on that board, powerful friends. They would be very distressed to hear their employee is inciting riots, consorting with known fugitives, and leveling slander against the man who is financing this territory's future." "You are threatening me," Nora said. "I am offering you a choice," Crowley said, his voice as smooth as oiled steel. "Go back to your little lean-to, teach your letters, forget this unfortunate misunderstanding, or I will see you ruined. I will see you run out of this territory, and I will personally burn that school to the ground with my own hands." Nora looked at him. She saw the threat, she saw the power, and she saw the desperation. He was afraid. "The train," she said, her voice quiet, "is scheduled to arrive in 10 minutes. Crowley's eyes widened. Just a fraction, she knew. "Judge," Nora said, turning her back on Crowley, a gesture of profound dismissal. "I accuse that man of conspiracy to commit mass murder. I accuse Harlan Pike of murder, and the evidence is on the 7 o'clock freight train, which is carrying 4 crates of dynamite. I am going to the station. I pray you will come with me." She turned and walked out of the hotel. Jedediah and Tommy followed, flanking her like guards. The Reverend Miller wrung his hands, torn. Judge Harrison looked at the paper, then at Crowley's furious, mottled face, slowly, deliberately. The judge picked up his hat and followed Nora. Ash pushed his horse until its breath was a raw, tearing sound in the thin air. He was not on a trail. He was on a high, narrow mesa, a shortcut known only to the Dane, leaping washes and praying the animal's legs would not break. The sky was turning from gray to a pale, bruised pink. He could hear it, the distant, rhythmic chug of the engine, the high whistle echoing off the canyons. He was running out of time. He spurred the horse down a steep scree slope, sliding more than running, and landed hard on the gravel bed beside the tracks. The bridge, a skeletal spiderweb of timber, was less than a mile away. The train was closer. He saw the signal box, a small, lonely shack by the side of the tracks. He dismounted, not even stopping the horse, and sprinted. His wounded arm throbbed. His lungs burned. He reached the box. The signal arm was set to clear. The lock was heavy iron. He pulled the knife with her blue cloth and jammed the tip into the keyhole. He put his shoulder into it, twisting, using all his strength and weight. The metal screamed, and the lock burst open. He yanked the door open and threw the heavy lever. The signal arm outside dropped, its red lantern swinging into place. He stopped, gasping, listening. The train's engine chugged, unabated. It was not slowing. Of course, The engineer would not stop for a random signal in the middle of the desert. He would assume it was broken, a common enough occurrence. Ash needed more. He needed fire. He ran back to his horse. He looked at the bridge, then at the train, which was just rounding the bend, its single headlamp a bright, approaching eye. He had perhaps 1 minute. He needed smoke. He needed a signal of indisputable danger. He pulled the oilcloth from his own saddle. He pulled his bedroll. He piled them directly on the tracks, in the center of the gravel bed. He pulled the small, waterproof pouch of matches he always carried. He struck one. It flared. He lit the oilcloth. It caught a greasy black smoke. He needed more. He looked down at his own arm. The bandage Nora had applied at the river. It was soaked in his blood, but it was cloth. With his teeth and his good hand, he tore it off, adding it to the fire. The bloody linen sizzled and smoked. He heard the train's whistle, a series of short, sharp shrieks. Alarm. The engineer had seen the fire. The sound of steam and grinding brakes filled the air. The train was slowing. A man appeared on the side of the boxcar, the one stenciled, "Explosives." Harlan Pike. His face was black with soot and rage. He saw Ash on the tracks, silhouetted against his own fire. "You!" Pike roared. He raised his rifle. Ash did not run. He stood by his fire, a lone, defiant figure. Pike fired. The bullet was a hot poker that seared the air, slicing through the flesh of Ash's shoulder. The impact spun him around, knocking him to his knees. He was hit, but he was not down. He saw Pike aiming again, a careful, killing shot. The train captain, a large man in overalls, was wrestling with the brake, his face a mask of confusion, staring at Ash. Ash knew he had to confirm the danger. He fumbled in his belt pouch. He had one small signal flare, saved from his scouting days. He struck the cap on the rock. It flared, a brilliant, blinding white light. He held it up, his arm screaming in pain, painting the pre-dawn light with a chemical fire that could not be mistaken. That did it. The train captain saw the flare. He saw the fire on the tracks. He saw the man get shot. This was not a broken signal. This was an ambush. He slammed the brake to its final stop. The train shuddered, its wheels locking, and screeched to a halt, the engine groaning, not 50 yards from the bridge. Harlan Pike cursed, trapped on a stopped train, his target still alive. The town arrived at the station. It was not a mob, not yet. It was a confused, frightened collection of people O'Malley, the cattleman who had signed Crowley's paper, the store owner, all drawn by the commotion Nora had started. "Where is this train?" one of them demanded. "It is late." "It is stopped," Nora said, her voice shaking, pointing down the track. "At the bridge." Just then, they heard the whistle, slow and cautious. The train was crawling forward, having deemed the track clear. It pulled into the small station, steam hissing from its pistons. The train captain jumped down, his face pale and furious. "What in blazes is going on? There is a man out there who there is a fire, and one of my passengers shot him." "There," Tommy shouted. He pointed at the open boxcar. Harlan Pike stood there, his rifle still in his hand, his face a mask of defeat. Beside him were the crates, 4 of them, stenciled danger, explosives. "That is him," Tommy cried, his voice breaking. "That is the man who shot Ben. That is the murderer." Jedediah Smith did not wait for the judge. He vaulted onto the platform, his blacksmith's hammer in his hand. Pike raised his rifle, but he was too slow. Jedediah hit the rifle, not the man, his hammer blow sending it spinning into the air. The blacksmith grabbed Pike by the shirt and hauled him off the train, throwing him onto the wooden platform at the judge's feet. "Caught red-handed. Judge," Jedediah said, his voice grim. "With the dynamite. And the letter." He ripped a folded paper from Pike's coat. It was Crowley's handwritten orders. Silas Crowley, who had arrived with the crowd, turned white. His plan, his perfect, vicious plan, was in ruins. He was exposed. "This is a lie," he roared, his mask of civilization finally melting. "A setup. I will not be stopped by this. He looked around, his eyes wild. He saw O'Malley and two of the rough cattlemen who hung around the saloon. He pulled a thick wad of bills from his pocket. $500. To any man who burns that school, burn it now, burn this filth out of my town." The men looked at the money, then at Crowley, then at the judge. They were mercenaries, but they were not fools. O'Malley shook his head. "I am not crossing a federal judge. Silas, you are on your own." The crowd, seeing the dynamite, seeing Pike bound, seeing Crowley's transformation into a desperate tyrant, finally understood. They had been played. They had been turned against each other by this man's greed. Nora Hayes climbed onto a baggage cart, her muddy skirt and torn shirt a stark contrast to her clear, strong voice. "Listen to me," she called out, and the crowd, shamed and angry, went silent. "For weeks, we have been afraid of each other, afraid of the dying, afraid of losing what little we have. And that fear is what men like him use to control us." She pointed at Crowley, who stood frozen, his money still in his hand. "He told us this was his land. He told us this was our town. He tried to set us against our neighbors, to make us fight over scraps. But he was lying. There is no his and mine when it comes to survival." She looked at the faces, the settlers, the children, Claw's family who had arrived, drawn by the train. "That man," she said, pointing down the tracks, where a lone figure could be seen, staggering toward them. "A man you call a savage. He just saved your lives. He stopped this train. He saved this bridge. He saved this town. He did it for all of us, because the water and the land and this future, it does not belong to any one of us. It belongs to all of us." The sun was just beginning to crest the horizon. The first light, clean and golden, hit her face. "There is no more his land or my land," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "There is only our water, and we will protect it, together." Ash had not made it 10 steps. He was staggering, his left shoulder a mass of blood. The world tilting. Nora ran from the baggage cart, her medical box, which had been brought from the school by Claw's family, already in her hands. "Ash, you are shot," she cried, grabbing him as he stumbled. He looked at her, his face pale, but his eyes clear. "It is just a graze. The bullet went through." "Sit," she commanded, forcing him down onto the station platform, the same spot where Pike had been thrown. As she ripped open his shirt, a new sound filled the air, a shout from the direction of the warehouse. "Fire! The warehouse is on fire!" A plume of oily black smoke began to pour from the roof of the large supply building. In the chaos, with the train stopped and Crowley roaring, no one had noticed the sparks from the engine's smokestack. Thrown during its emergency stop, they had nested in the dry, weathered shingles of the warehouse roof. "The wind!" a man shouted in terror. "It is blowing this way!" But it was not. The wind, the constant, predictable west wind, had died. The air was still, hanging heavy and hot. And then, a new breeze began to pick up, a hot, unnatural breath. It came from the east, from the high mesas, rolling back toward them. It was the backdraft of the growing inferno. "It is blowing the fire back," Jedediah yelled. "It is blowing it toward the town, toward us." The crowd, which had been a ring of accusers, dissolved into a panic. They were trapped. The fire was ahead, in the warehouse and the dry grass. The bridge was behind them, their only escape, and it was a mile away. "Get water buckets." Silas Crowley saw his chance. In the terror and the smoke, he was invisible. He began to move, melting away from the platform, his hand inside his coat. No one moves. Judge Harrison's voice was a crack of authority. This man, he pointed at Crowley, is under my jurisdiction. We will have order. Your order means nothing, a man screamed. We will be cinders in 10 minutes. Then we will have justice in 9, a new voice said. It was deep, and it carried the peace of the desert. Hastin, the old dying elder, stood at the edge of the platform. He had arrived, as silent as the smoke, Kla at his side. He was not looking at the fire. He was looking at the small, ancient circle of standing stones on the hill just above the trading post, a place the settlers had ignored, using it as a windbreak for their cattle. The fire is the judge, Hastings said, his voice reaching every man. It has trapped us. The white man's court is gone. This, he pointed to the stones, is the place of judgment. This is the Nachid, the circle of stones. Bring the accused. We will have justice now, or we will all burn together. The crowd, caught between the fire and the old man's unshakable calm, felt a new, strange hope. This was not the saloon. This was not the church. It was something older. He is right, Judge Harrison said, his face grim, but his eyes respectful. This is not my courtroom. This is the land's. Take them both. Jedediah and O'Malley, now allies, grabbed Pike, hauling him to his feet. 2 cattlemen seized Crowley, who struggled, his face purple with rage. They moved. The entire town, settlers and dine, a grim procession lit by the growing, unnatural dawn of the fire. They walked to the small hill and formed a ring inside the ancient circle of stones. The wind was hot on their faces, the smoke stinging their eyes. Nora finished tying a tight pressure bandage on Ash's shoulder. Can you walk? I can, he said. He stood, his good arm going around her waist, supporting himself, and they walked together, the last to enter the circle. Judge Harrison stood in the center, near Hastine. This is a court of the territory, held under God and the sky. The judge declared, his voice formal. Let the evidence be heard. This, Nora said, stepping forward, her voice clear and strong. She held up the muddy, signed paper. Crowley's plan, to take the spring and destroy the bridge. And this, Jedediah said, throwing the wet, useless blasting caps at Crowley's feet. The Dine sabotage we stopped at the spring. And him, Tommy said, his voice shaking but loud. He pointed at Harlan Pike. I saw him. He murdered Ben. He shot him in the cold because Mr. Crowley ordered a necessary loss. All eyes went to Pike, the deputy, his face gray, his small eyes darting, looked at Crowley. Crowley looked away, his expression one of utter contempt. Pike was disposable. Pike broke. He fell to his knees. He made me, the deputy shrieked, the confession tearing out of him. It was him, always him he promised me. He said it was just to open the mine. He said a few lives. A few lives were just the price of business. Pike turned, his face a mask of desperate, pleading terror, not to the judge, but to Nora. My mother. She is old. She is in Prescott. She is blind. She has no one. He sobbed. Do not let him. Do not let me hang. Please, ma'am, save my mother. You should have thought of that. Jedediah spat. Before you shot Ben. Silence. Hastine said. The word was not loud, but it stopped everyone. Crowley had been watching this, his mind calculating. He saw the ring of angry faces. He saw the judge, his face set. He saw Pike, a weeping, useless fool. He was finished, unless he changed the terms. He moved, his speed belying his size. He was standing next to Nora, before Ash, wounded and slow, could react. Crowley had his arm around Nora's throat. His other hand held a small, gleaming Derringer pistol, pressed hard against her temple. No one moves, Crowley roared, his voice a raw shriek of triumph. Judge, elder, You will all stand back. You will give me a horse. You will let me ride out of here. Or this righteous, interfering bitch dies right now." The circle went dead silent. The only sound was the roar of the fire, which was now cresting the small ridge, sending embers raining down around them. Ash stood 10 feet away. His rifle was on the ground. His knife was in its sheath. He looked at the gun at Nora's head. He looked at her eyes. She was terrified, but she was not looking at Crowley. She was looking at him. "Trust me," her eyes said. He let his good hand fall away from his belt, away from his knife. He took 1 step forward. "Let her go, Crowley," Ash said, his voice calm, reasonable. "1 more step, savage." Crowley snarled, the pistol pressing deeper. "And I will paint these stones with her brain." Ash stopped. He slowly, deliberately, raised both his hands, palms forward, empty. "You want a horse," Ash said. "You can have mine, but you cannot take her. She will slow you down. Let her go. Take me instead. I am the one you really want. I am the one who stopped you." Crowley laughed, a high, strangled sound. "You, I would rather kill you, but she is my insurance. Now, get the horse." Ash took another step, his hands still up. "You are not thinking. Crowley, look, the fire. It is almost on us. We are surrounded. You have no way out, not even with her." Crowley's eyes darted. Ash was right. The fire was no longer just at the station. It had jumped the path. The hillside was burning. The circle of stones was an island in a sea of flame. "You did this!" Crowley shrieked, his panic rising. "No," Ash said, taking 1 more slow, quiet step. "The land did." At that exact moment, the wind, which had been blowing the fire toward them, suddenly shifted. It was a massive gust, a will of the desert itself. It came from the west, the original direction, but with a new, furious power. It struck the circle, a blinding, choking wall of sand and hot ash. Everyone turned, shielding their eyes, everyone except Crowley. He was blinded, his eyes full of grit, and he roared, loosening his grip on Nora for just 1 second to wipe his face. It was the second Ash had been waiting for. He did not lunge, he moved like the wind itself. He was inside Crowley's guard. His good hand, his right, did not go for the gun. It slammed into Crowley's wrist, the one holding the derringer, shattering the man's grip. The small pistol flew into the dust. His other hand, his wounded left, found Crowley's other wrist. Crowley, blinded and terrified, fought back, a bull of a man. But Ash did not fight him. He used the man's own momentum, the same move he had used on O'Malley. He twisted. Crowley went to his knees, his arm bent at a savage angle. And then, Ash did the final thing. The blue cloth, Nora's promise, was still tied to his wounded forearm. With a grim, final satisfaction, his fingers, clumsy with pain, untied the knot. He yanked the cloth free. He took Crowley's right wrist, the one that had held the gun to Nora's head, and with a swift, binding motion, he wrapped the blue calico around it, pulling it tight, a makeshift manacle. He had locked the monster's hand with her trust. "It is over," Ash said, his voice a low gasp, as he stood over the kneeling man. "The fire!" Jedediah's roar brought them back. "We have to make a break. We have to dig now." The moment of justice was over. The fight for survival had begun. "Dine," Ash called. "To me, we know this, we fight fire." The settlers, their faces pale, looked lost. "Jedediah O'Malley," Nora's voice cut through the smoke. She was already tearing strips from her own skirt, the one clean part left. "Get the men we dig, we need a fire break. We use the wind, it is with us now. It is blowing the fire back on itself." The two groups, who had been enemies an hour before, looked at each other, then, as one, they ran. Dine and Settler. They grabbed shovels from the trading post. They used their bare hands. They used saddle blankets. They began to dig, a frantic, desperate line in the dirt. beating back the flames. "Wounded," Nora called. "Anyone burned? Come here to the stones." She established a makeshift aid station inside the circle, the one place the fire would not reach. Tommy, his face smudged with soot, brought her the water canteen. She tended to a settler child who had been burned by a falling ember. She tended to an old dying woman who was overcome by the smoke. She was not a teacher. She was not a victim. She was a healer. For an hour, they fought, a single community, united by the roar of the flames and the cries of their leaders. Ash, his shoulder bleeding, his arm a mass of agony, worked alongside Jedediah, their sweat and soot mixing until the firebreak was dug. And then, as quickly as it had come, the danger passed. The wind held, pushing the fire back onto its own burned, black path. The town was saved. The trading post was singed. The warehouse was a smoking skeleton. But the people were alive. They gathered, exhausted, caked in ash and sweat, back at the circle of stones. Silas Crowley sat where Ash had left him, bound. Harlan Pike sat beside him, weeping silently. Judge Harrison stepped into the center of the ring. He looked at the united, exhausted faces. "This court," he said, his voice hoarse, "finds these men, Silas Crowley and Harlan Pike, guilty of conspiracy, murder, and endangering this entire community." He looked at Hustin. The old man nodded. "They will not be judged by us." The judge declared, "They will be turned over to the federal marshal at Fort Defiance. Their justice will be swift, but their judgment was here. Today." Crowley, his face black with soot, looked up. He was a ruined man. He said nothing. Ash stood next to Nora, their shoulders touching. The smoke was clearing. The sun, a clean, bright gold, was finally rising. Nora looked at the spring, far in the distance, untouched. Then she looked at Ash. He was watching her. Without a word, he bent down. He picked up a small, fire-blackened stone. He walked to the edge of the circle, to a pile of rocks that had been a shrine, and placed his stone on top. A promise. Nora found her own stone, a smooth white piece of quartz. She walked and stood beside him. She placed her stone next to his, a promise kept. The dawn that broke over the trading post was unlike any that had come before. It was not a clean, sharp desert light. It was a filthy, yellow illumination, filtered through the smoke of the still smoldering warehouse and the acres of blackened grass. The air stank of ash, wet wool, and fear. The town, or what was left of its spirit, was gathered in the stone circle. They were exhausted, singed, and quiet. They were a single, stunned entity. Judge Harrison, his face gray with soot and fatigue, stood by the two prisoners, Silas Crowley, his fine suit ruined, his hands bound by Jedediah's rope, stared at the ground, a ruined titan. Harlan Pike was a collapsed, weeping heap, his small body shaking. A detail of 4 soldiers, dispatched from the train by the captain, arrived, their blue uniforms shockingly clean. They were the federal marshal's men. "Judge Harrison," the sergeant said, saluting, "we will take the prisoners." They hauled Crowley to his feet. He said nothing. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a vast, hollow emptiness. He was a man who had bet everything and lost. When they grabbed Harlan Pike, he writhed, his voice a raw shriek. "My mother, please, she is blind. She is in Prescott. She will die alone. She will starve." The soldiers ignored him, pulling him toward the horses. Nora Hayes, who had been washing Ash's shoulder wound with her last drops of clean water, stood up. She walked past the soldiers, past the judge, and stood in Pike's path. He stopped, his eyes wide, thinking she had come to spit on him. "Judge," Nora said, her voice quiet but carrying in the silence. "I know this man is a murderer. I know he is a liar. But his mother is not—" The judge looked at her, his expression weary. "Madam, justice is not concerned with his mother. But humanity is," Nora said. "He is going to hang. That is justice. But letting an old, blind woman starve, that is vengeance, and we have had enough of that." She looked at the judge. "You are returning to Prescott. I have a few dollars left. From my teaching salary, it is not much. It is $20. But perhaps you could see it gets to her, arrange for a doctor, or just for food, so she does not pay for his sins." Pike stared at her, his mouth open, his sobs catching in his throat. This woman, the one he had tried to ruin, to have killed, was showing him a mercy he did not deserve. He could not comprehend it. Judge Harrison held Nora's gaze for a long time. He saw the iron in her, but he also saw the deep, pure spring of her compassion. He slowly nodded. "I will not take your money, Miss Hayes," he said. "But I will see to it. The territory owes you a debt. I will see that his mother is cared for out of the public fund. It is the least we can do." Harlan Pike stopped weeping. He just looked at Nora, his expression broken. "Thank you," he whispered. It was the only true thing he had ever said. He did not resist as the soldiers led him away. The town was left alone, with the smoke and the bodies of their own failures. The first matter was the water. The second was the law. Haston and Judge Harrison convened the second, and perhaps most important, meeting in the stone circle. "They are gone," Taggart, the cattleman, said, his voice rough. "But my cattle are still thirsty. That spring, we know where it is now." A low murmur of agreement went through the other ranchers. "The spring is Todzil Nato," Hastin said, his voice calm. "It is the heart of the mother. It is not for cattle. It is for prayer." "Then we will die," Taggart said, his desperation returning. "No," Ash said. He stood, his arm in a fresh white sling that Nora had made. "You will not die, but you will not own the spring itself, the place where the water comes from the rock. That is a sacred radius. No mines, no blasting, no cattle. That is the law of the land." He looked at Taggart. "But the water, it runs off. It forms a creek. The runoff, that is for all. The Dine will water their flocks. You will water your cattle. The town will have its share, but no man will ever own the source." The judge nodded, seeing the wisdom. "A treaty," he said. "A water treaty, binding under the law of this territory. We will write it now." He pulled a fresh piece of paper from his valise, and there, in the circle of stones, lit by the smoky morning sun, they signed it. Haston made his mark. Taggart, his hand shaking, signed his name. Jedediah signed for the town. O'Malley signed. Even the train captain signed, as a witness for the railroad, guaranteeing the treaty would be honored. The war for water was over. "Now," the judge said, "there is the matter of restitution." He held up the papers he had seized from Crowley's office. Silas Crowley's assets in this territory. His bank accounts, his survey equipment, they are seized by order of the court. He looked at the smoldering ruins of the warehouse, at the scarred land. A portion of these funds will be set aside as reparations. First, to Taggart, for his losses. Second, he looked at Nora, to the families of this community, Dine and Settler, who were terrorized by his actions. We need a fund, a way to rebuild. Jedediah Smith stepped forward, his face still black with soot. There is only one person here who has never lied, never faltered, and never thought of herself. The fund. It should be hers, to manage, for all of us. "I agree," O'Malley grunted, shocking everyone. "Then it is settled." The judge said, "The Nora Hayes Fund for Education and Health is hereby established. It will be used to build a new, proper school and a clinic." Nora was stunned, speechless. I will need help," she stammered. "I am a teacher. I am not a builder." "You will not be alone," Jedediah said, and he placed his heavy, calloused hand on her shoulder. "I was a fool. I built with greed. Now I will build with my hands. For you, for the children. We will build you a school of brick, ma'am. One the wind cannot touch." Nora looked at Haston. "And the clinic," she said. "I have my small box of medicines, but I do not know the desert. I do not know the herbs. Your people, they have healers. I would be honored if one would consent to work with me, to teach me, so we can heal. Together." Hastin looked at her, a long, appraising gaze. He saw no pride in her, only a deep, humble desire to serve. He nodded slowly. "My granddaughter, she walks the path of the herbs. She will come." The town began to breathe again. In the afternoon, as the work of clearing the debris began, a dine rider approached the stone circle. He was a scout, a stranger to this clan. He dismounted and walked directly to Ash, who was watching Jedediah pace out the foundation for the new school. The scout spoke in low, rapid dine. Nora could not understand the words, but she saw Ash go rigid. His face, which had been set in a mask of weary resolve, suddenly seemed hollow. "What is it?" Nora asked, coming to his side. Ash did not look at her for a long moment. He was staring at the distant, blue mountains. "News," he said, his voice thick. "From the Pueblo lands. To the east, a trader, a Pueblo man. He was here. He heard my story. He heard of the man from the Long Walk who lost his sister." "Ash," Nora's hand went to her heart. He carries a story," Ash said, the words difficult. "From his village, a dying girl, found in the snow, half dead, so many years ago, found by a Pueblo family. They had no children. They raised her." "Is it her?" Nora whispered. "Is she alive?" He says her name is Asen, little woman. He says she is married. She has children." Ash closed his eyes. The warrior who had faced guns and floods, who had not flinched from fire, was undone by a whisper of hope. He had spent his life mourning a ghost, and she was alive. "I must go," he said. "Yes," Nora said, her own eyes filling with tears. "You must go, now." He turned to her. His gaze was fierce. "No, not now." "But Ash, your sister." "You," he said, and his good hand found her arm, his grip possessive. "Are my forever, my vow. I will not leave you. Not until this school is built, not until this town is safe." "I am safe," she insisted. "No," he said, "not yet. The walls are not up." He looked at her, and his meaning was clear. His journey to his sister was not one he would make alone. It was something they would plan. When their work was done, when their home was built. The town, bound by its new treaty and its new fund, changed. The railroad, embarrassed by Crowley, sent a full engineering crew. The train captain himself supervised. They did not just repair the trestle bridge, they reinforced it with steel, making it stronger than before. The signal boxes were standardized. Jedediah, true to his word, became a force of nature. He fired his forge day and night, not for engines, but for hinges, for roof supports. The burned warehouse was cleared, and the good lumber, the lumber Crowley had stockpiled for his mine, was seized by the fund. The new school rose, brick by brick, not far from the spring, but a respectful distance from it. It had real glass windows, a real floor, and a second room in the back with a clean white cot, the clinic. At the next town meeting, held in the completed unpainted schoolhouse, a strange, new ritual took place. O'Malley stood up, his face red, twisting his hat in his hands. He looked at Nora, and then at Haston. who sat in the back. I was wrong, he said, the words sounding like rocks in his throat. I was a fool, and I was a brute. Miss Hayes, I am sorry for how I treated you, for the mob. He looked at Hastin, and to you, sir, I apologize. My saloon, water is free, for everyone, always. Taggart stood up. Me too, I was blinded by greed. I am sorry. One by one, the men who had signed Crowley's paper, the men who had formed the mob, stood and spoke their shame. It was not easy, it was halting, and it was ugly. But it was true. The stone circle had become a place of confession. Nora, standing at the front, found her blue cloth, the one Ash had used to bind Crowley. It had been returned by the judge. Stiff with dirt and rage, she had washed it, over and over, in the clean water of the spring, until the blue was bright again. She walked to the new solid wooden door of the school. Jedediah had hammered a single, clean nail into it. Nora tied the blue cloth to the nail, where it hung, a bright, soft slash of color against the hard wood. This is a safe place, she announced, her voice ringing in the new room. Whoever you are, settler or dine, child or adult, when you pass this cloth, you are under our protection. This is a place of peace. This is our safe harbor. That night, Ash did not go back to his high mesa. He sat on the porch of the new school, his rifle across his knees. He was guarding the foundation. Nora came out, bringing him a cup of coffee. He took it, his fingers brushing hers. He did not speak. He did not need to. In the old days, his silence had been a wall. It had been a weapon, a thing he used to keep the world, to keep her, at a distance. Now, his silence was a presence. It was a comfort. It was the sound of a man who was not leaving. It was the sound of a man who had come home. He would sit like that, night after night, while she graded her lessons by the lamplight. He was simply there. He mended the stable roof. He checked the new foundation for cracks. He rode the ridges, not as a fugitive, but as a guardian. Nora learned his new language. His presence was his poetry. His protection was his vow. And then, one evening, the wind changed. The air, which had been dry and hot for weeks, suddenly turned cool. It smelled different. Nora stepped outside. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, and the air was heavy with a smell she had never known, the smell of dust and creosote, sharp and electric. A single, fat drop of rain hit the dry earth in front of her boot. It left a dark circle, the size of $1. Then another and another. It was not a flood. It was not a violent storm. It was a slow, steady, healing rain. It began to fall, whispering on the new shingles of the school roof. It washed the last of the ash from the stones. It settled the dust. It made the air smell clean, like the first day of the world. Ash walked up, standing beside her, his face turned up to the sky. He let the rain wash the grit from his face. "It is clean," Nora whispered. Ash looked at her, a small, slow smile touching his lips. He said nothing. He just stood beside her, his good shoulder brushing hers, as the desert drank in the promise of new life. They were not married in a church. They were bound at sunrise, in the center of the stone circle, the air still smelling of the recent rain. Hastin officiated, not with a book, but with a handful of blue corn. It was not a wedding. It was a joining, as simple and as profound as the land itself. Jedediah Smith was there, his face clean, his large hands clasped. Claw and Thomas stood as witnesses. Hastin's granddaughter, the young healer, brought a small bundle of sage. Hastin spoke in Dine, his voice a soft river of words, and then in English, for Nora. "The white man," he said, "speaks of chains. He speaks of man and wife. The Dine speak of Hosho, of balance. He does not walk before her. She does not walk behind him. They walk beside." He looked at Ash, whose wounded arm was healing. The long scar, a pale red. You are bitter water. You are born for towering house. You are a warrior. You are a guardian. You will be her shield. He looked at Nora. You are the healer. You are the teacher. You are the one who binds. You will be his heart. He gave Ash a single, perfect kernel of blue corn. This is the mother. This is the earth. It is sustenance. Feed her. Ash held the kernel, and for a moment, he looked at it, this small, hard promise. Then he gently offered it to Nora, who took it from his hand. Hastine gave Nora a kernel of yellow corn, bought from the trading post. This is the new way. This is the sun. It is a long journey. Feed him. Nora offered the corn to Ash. He took it. It is done. Hastine said, You are one. Walk in beauty. Their home was not a house. It was a foundation. Jedediah and Ash, with the help of the railroad crew, had built a small, sturdy adobe building. It was not at the school, but it was not far. It sat on a low rise, close enough to the spring that they could hear the water, but far enough away that the sacred ground was left in peace. The most important room was the kitchen. The lean-to school had been salvaged, its lumber repurposed. The old, flapping canvas sheet was gone, replaced by a wall with 2 real windows. The pot-bellied stove, which had been lost in the flood, was replaced by a new, larger one, donated by the railroad captain. Nora, Hastings' granddaughter, and a growing number of women, both dine and settler, used the space. It was a clinic, a classroom, and a kitchen, all in one. It was where herbs were dried, where bandages were rolled, where stews were cooked, and where lessons were given. Jedediah, with a new, quiet pride, hung a wooden sign he had carved over the door. It did not say Roosevelt's Kitchen. It said, in clean, simple letters, the River School Kitchen. It was a place for the community. It was a place where no one was hungry, and no one was turned away. The high desert measured time in seasons, not years, but 3 winters passed, and the snows were deep, and the water in the spring ran clear and strong. The town, anchored by its new school and its new treaty, held. Kla, the boy who had survived the flood, had learned his letters from Nora. He had learned to read the earth from Ash, but he had learned a new skill from Jedediah and the railroad engineers, how to read the language of steel and stress. He was hired by the railroad, not as a laborer, but as a foreman for the maintenance crew, earning a full and equal wage, his sharp eyes responsible for the safety of the entire line. Nitsi, the little girl whose hand Nora had bandaged on that first day, had never left Nora's side. She had learned the white man's medicine from Nora's books, and the dine medicine from Hastings' granddaughter. She was the first and only woman for 100 miles who could both suture a wound with clean silk and create a poultice from juniper ash to stop an infection. She was the bridge. The stone circle was no longer a place of judgment. It was a place of debate. The town council met there once a month when the weather was good. Nora saw Taggart, the cattleman, arguing not with Hastings but with Hastings' eldest son. They were arguing over grazing rights, a timeless, bitter conflict. But they were not shouting. They were not carrying rifles. They were pointing at the paper, the water treaty, and they were listening. Jedediah, who had been unofficially elected mayor, sat between them, his hammer on the stone, letting the silence work. They had learned, the hard way, to talk less and to listen more. Ash and Nora, their work done for the day, would often sit by a small fire near the kitchen. The children of the school, both white and dine, would gather. Nora would read to them from her worn book of poetry, and when she was done, Ash would tell them a story of Coyote, and how he had tried to steal the water, and how he had been tricked by the smart, small rabbit. The children would laugh, understanding the moral in their bones, a lesson of justice and humility that no slate could ever teach. One afternoon, in the late summer of the third year, a small party of riders appeared from the east. They were not Navajo. They were Pueblo. They led their horses to the spring. Ash was mending a harness on the school porch. He looked up, and his hands went still. He watched them. A woman dismounted. She was dressed in the Pueblo way, but her face was the face he had seen in his nightmares for more than 20 years. It was his mother's face. It was his face. He stood up. He did not walk. He simply stood, frozen, the harness falling from his lap. The woman, Asen, little woman, saw him. She had heard the stories from the traders of the Dine warrior at the spring, the man who had lost his sister in the snow. She had come. She walked toward him, her own family, her husband and her son, staying back by the horses. She stopped 10 feet from him. They just looked at each other, two halves of a memory made whole. She did not weep. She had a small, round river stone in her hand. She walked past him, her brother, the ghost who had haunted her own life. She walked to the small pile of stones on the hill, the shrine where Ash and Nora had placed their own markers after the fire. Asen bent down. She placed her stone next to his, a promise, a healing, a return. Ash finally moved. He went to her, and for the first time since he was a boy, he put his arms around his sister. He held her, and the long walk, the great bleeding wound of his life, finally, began to close. Nora watched from the doorway of the kitchen, her hands covered in flour, and she wept, her tears washing the dust from her hands. That night, the air was cool, the sky a vast ocean of stars. Ash and Nora sat on the porch of their small home. The town was quiet. The children were asleep. Nora was at a small basin, washing. In her hands was the blue calico cloth. It was faded now, from the sun and the washing, a pale, soft blue. It had been a bandage, a promise, a weapon, a bond. Now, it was just a cloth. She wrung the water from it and hung it on a small line near the door, where it fluttered in the night breeze. She turned, wiping her damp hands on her apron. Ash was watching her, his dark eyes soft in the starlight. He had been quiet all evening, his reunion with his sister a deep, sacred thing he was still holding. He looked at the small, fluttering piece of blue. He smiled, a small, slow smile that was still new to his face. "Forever," he said, his voice quiet, meant only for her. "It starts every time we keep a small promise." Nora smiled back. She went to him, sitting on the step beside him. She took his good hand, the one that was scarred, and held it. The world did not need to wait for their story to end. The new day was already coming. As the first pale pink light touched the high red cliffs, a sound was born in the quiet. It was the high, clear, mournful note of a wooden flute, as Ash greeted the dawn from the rocks above the spring. A moment later, from the valley below, a new sound answered it, the sharp, clear, insistent clang of an iron bell, as Nora called the children to the school. The two sounds, one ancient, one new, rose on the clean desert air. They did not fight. They did not cancel each other out. They drifted across the canyon, met and merged, becoming a single, harmonious song. A future had not been won by magic, or by law, or by a single act of heroism. It had been built, brick by brick, word by word, by those who had finally, painfully, chosen to respect rather than to fear. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am so curious to know where you are listening from. Please drop a comment below and let me know, so we can all connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, I would be so grateful if you would subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And please, if you have a moment, support us further by hitting that hype button, so this story can be heard by more people.